Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 34, and I should have known better than to trust Jake's enthusiasm about Dolly Sods wilderness in West Virginia. The trail cameras we'd installed to document wildlife for our nature blog should have been showing deer. Maybe a black bear if we were lucky. Instead, every single photo showed our group of four, Jake, Marcus, Lisa, and me, plus one unknown figure standing at the edge of every frame. The figure never moved closer. It just watched. Jake had been planning this trip for months, ever since our last camping disaster in Pennsylvania, where we'd forgotten half our gear and spent 2 days eating granola bars in a leaking tent. This time would be different, he promised. We had Marcus's new RV, Lisa's photography equipment, and enough supplies to survive a week in comfort. The Dolly Sods Plateau, with its rocky outcroppings and ancient bogs, would be perfect for the kind of content our followers craved. I'd met Jake 3 years ago at a hiking meetup in D.C. He was the kind of guy who owned 17 different types of carabiners and could tell you the exact weight of his pack down to the ounce. Marcus and Lisa were college friends of his. Marcus, a quiet software engineer who'd recently inherited his grandmother's RV, and Lisa, a freelance photographer with an eye for capturing the perfect wilderness shot. We weren't exactly best friends, but we worked well together, and the blog had been bringing in decent money. The drive to West Virginia took 6 hours in Marcus's vintage Winnebago, a 1989 behemoth that smelled like old coffee and his grandmother's lavender sachets. Lisa complained about the lack of phone service as we wound through the mountains while Jake narrated every geographical feature we passed like he was David Attenborough. Marcus just gripped the steering wheel and muttered about hairpin turns. We reached the Dolly Sods trailhead parking area just as the sun began its descent behind the Appalachian ridges. The place felt bigger than I'd expected. Endless rolling highlands covered in low shrubs and scattered with weathered sandstone formations. The air carried a bite that promised a cold night, and something else I couldn't identify. Something that made my skin crawl. "Perfect spot for the RV," Jake announced, pointing to a relatively flat area near a cluster of wind-bent red spruce trees. "We'll set up the cameras along that game trail there, and that ridge over there, and—" "Jesus, Jake, let us get unpacked first," Lisa interrupted, hauling her camera bag out of the RV. She was tall and angular, with the kind of pale skin that burned easily, and short black hair that always looked like she'd just run her fingers through it. Her Brooklyn accent got thicker when she was irritated. Marcus began the methodical process of leveling the RV while Jake bounced around like an excited golden retriever, unpacking gear and talking non-stop about the wilderness area's geological history. I helped Lisa carry equipment, trying to shake the feeling that we were being observed. The Dolly Sods had an otherworldly quality in the fading light. The landscape was more alien than anything I'd expected in West Virginia. A high-altitude plateau that felt more like Scotland than Appalachia. Stunted trees, twisted by constant wind, dotted the rocky terrain, and sphagnum bogs reflected the darkening sky like black mirrors. Everything felt ancient and untouched, as if we'd driven back in time. "Trail cameras go up tonight," Jake declared as Marcus finished connecting the RV's electrical system. "I want to catch whatever moves through here after dark." "What makes you think anything moves through here?" I asked, settling into one of the fold-out chairs Marcus had arranged in a circle near the RV's awning. "Are you kidding? This ecosystem is incredible. We've got everything from black bears to bobcats, maybe even some elk. The bog areas attract all kinds of wildlife." Jake's eyes gleamed with the kind of enthusiasm that had gotten us into trouble before. As darkness settled over the plateau, we installed 6 trail cameras along what appeared to be animal pathways. The cameras were Marcus's idea, high-end devices with infrared flashes that could capture crystal-clear images in complete darkness. Jake insisted on checking and rechecking each installation, making sure the motion sensors were properly calibrated and the SD cards had plenty of storage space. The night was remarkably quiet. No owl calls, no rustling leaves, not even the distant howl of coyotes I'd expected in a place this remote. just the whisper of wind across the rocks and the occasional creak of the RV settling. Lisa made coffee on the camp stove while Marcus fiddled with a battery-powered lantern that cast dancing shadows across our campsite. The LED lights inside the RV created a warm glow, but beyond our small circle of illumination, the darkness felt absolute. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is out here?" Lisa asked, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "It's wilderness," Jake said dismissively. "Of course it's quiet." But I knew what she meant. The silence felt wrong, like nature was holding its breath. We stayed up until almost midnight, talking about the next day's plans and editing photos on Lisa's laptop. The battery powered everything we needed, and Marcus had enough solar panels to keep us running indefinitely. It should have felt like luxury camping. Instead, I found myself glancing toward the windows every few minutes, expecting to see something looking back. When I finally crawled into my bunk, the RV had sleeping spaces for 6 people, though they were cramped. I lay awake listening to the absolute silence outside. Even Jake had stopped chattering, and I could hear the steady breathing of the others settling into sleep. Sometime in the early morning hours, I woke to the sound of footsteps on gravel. Not the heavy tread of boots, but something lighter, more cautious, like someone trying very hard not to be heard. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps circled the RV once, paused near what I thought was the door, then continued around to the other side. They stopped directly outside the window next to my bunk. My heart hammered against my ribs. Through the thin curtain, I could see nothing but darkness. But I had the overwhelming sensation that something was standing just inches away, separated from me only by glass and fabric. The presence lingered for what felt like an eternity, then moved away. The footsteps faded into silence. In the morning, Jake was the first one awake, practically vibrating with excitement about checking the trail cameras. I'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep after the footstep incident, and the others looked equally groggy as we gathered around the camp table for instant coffee and granola bars. "Did anyone else hear something walking around last night?" I asked. Marcus looked up from his coffee. "Yeah, actually. Thought it might be a bear. Bears don't walk that carefully," Lisa said. She had dark circles under her eyes. Jake waved dismissively. "Probably just deer. They can be surprisingly quiet when they want to be. Come on, let's go check those cameras." The trail cameras were all exactly where we'd left them, still blinking their little green lights to indicate they were recording. Jake pulled the SD cards with the reverence of a priest handling relics. "Jackpot," he breathed, scrolling through the first camera's images on his phone. "Look at this." The photos were time-stamped throughout the night, triggered by movement the cameras had detected. Most showed nothing but empty landscape under the infrared flash. But then Jake stopped scrolling. "What the hell?" He turned the phone toward us. The photo showed the 4 of us standing near the RV, exactly as we had been around 11 p.m. when we were setting up the cameras. But at the edge of the frame, barely visible in the infrared light, was a 5th figure. Tall, impossibly thin, standing perfectly still among the twisted trees. The angle made it impossible to make out details, but something about its posture was fundamentally wrong. Too rigid, too still. "Motion blur," Marcus said immediately. "Has to be. Maybe a tree branch moving in the wind." But Jake was already scrolling to the next image. Same scene, same 4 people, same motionless figure at the edge of the frame. Then the next photo, and the next. In every single image, the figure was there, always in the same relative position, always perfectly still, always watching. "This is impossible," Lisa whispered. "We would have seen someone standing there." Jake's hands were shaking slightly as he pulled the SD card from the second camera. Same results. Every photo that showed our group also showed the mysterious 5th figure, always positioned at the very edge of the frame, always motionless. The third camera had been positioned farther from our campsite, aimed at what appeared to be a game trail. Its photos showed the same pattern, our group visible in the distance, and the watching figure, now from a different angle. "It's like it knew where every camera was positioned," Marcus said quietly, "and it positioned itself to be visible in all of them." The 4th and 5th cameras told the same story, The sixth camera, the one Jake had insisted on placing nearly a quarter-mile away near a boggy area, showed something that made my blood turn to ice water. The figure was there, but this time it was much closer to the camera, close enough to see details. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and unnaturally thin, like someone had stretched a human being on a medieval rack. Its limbs were too long, joints in the wrong places. Its head was tilted at an angle that should have broken its neck. But worst of all were its eyes. Even in the washed-out infrared light, they seemed to glow with an intelligence that was both alien and hungry. And in every single photo, it was looking directly at the camera. "Pack up," Lisa said immediately. "We're leaving, right now." "Hang on," Jake protested. "This could be the discovery of a lifetime. Some kind of unknown primate species, maybe a surviving group of—" "Jake." Marcus's voice was flat. "Look at the timestamps." I leaned over his shoulder to see what he meant. The photos from the distant sixth camera were time-stamped throughout the night, showing the creature in various poses but always staring at the camera. The final photo was time-stamped at 6:47 a.m. It was currently 7:15 a.m. The thing had been standing in front of that camera less than 30 minutes ago. "It's still out there," I whispered. We spent the next hour in frantic preparation to leave. Jake argued that we should at least try to get closer to the sixth camera location, insist that we were dealing with a scientific discovery rather than something genuinely threatening. But the rest of us had seen enough. Lisa packed her camera equipment with military efficiency while Marcus began the process of preparing the RV for travel. I helped where I could, but found myself constantly scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The landscape that had seemed merely eerie the night before now felt actively malevolent. Every twisted tree could be hiding something. Every shadow could be concealing that impossible figure. As Marcus started the RV's engine, Jake made one final plea. "At least, let me go retrieve the cameras. We've got thousands of dollars worth of equipment out there." "Leave them," Lisa said firmly. "We can replace cameras. We can't replace our lives." But as we pulled away from the campsite, I noticed that Jake had palmed one of the SD cards. The look in his eyes suggested this wasn't over. The drive down from the plateau should have been a relief, but something felt wrong. The RV's engine ran rough, coughing and sputtering on hills that shouldn't have challenged it. Marcus kept checking the gauges and muttering about engine temperature. Halfway down the mountain, the engine died completely. "Shit," Marcus breathed, coasting to a stop on a narrow shoulder. "This thing was running fine yesterday." He popped the hood and spent 20 minutes examining the engine while the rest of us stood around feeling exposed and vulnerable. The forest pressed close on both sides of the mountain road, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. "Looks like the fuel pump," Marcus finally announced. "We're not going anywhere until I can get a replacement part." The nearest town was Seneca Rocks, about an hour's hike down the mountain road. Marcus and Jake volunteered to go for help while Lisa and I stayed with the RV. "I don't like splitting up," I said. "It's the middle of the day," Jake reasoned. "We'll be back before dark with the tow truck. You'll be fine." After they left, Lisa and I sat in uncomfortable silence inside the RV. She was editing photos on her laptop while I tried to read, but neither of us could focus. "Sarah," Lisa said after an hour, "look at this." She'd been going through the photos we'd taken the previous day before we'd discovered the trail camera images. Innocent shots of the landscape, our campsite, the four of us grinning beside the RV. But now, examining them more carefully, we could see something we'd missed before. In the background of nearly every photo, partially obscured by trees or rocks, was a familiar, elongated silhouette. "It was watching us from the moment we arrived," Lisa whispered. The realization hit like a physical blow. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't just appeared during the night. It had been stalking us, studying us, positioning itself just out of direct sight while remaining visible to any camera that might capture our group. "Why?" I asked. "What does it want?" Lisa shook her head. "I don't know, but look at this." She showed me another photo, this one taken just after we'd finished setting up camp. In it, Jake was pointing toward the location where we'd eventually place the first trail camera. And there, barely visible among the trees, The figure was positioned in exactly the spot where it would later appear in the camera's field of view. It knew, Lisa said. It knew where we were going to put the cameras before we put them there. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. This thing, whatever it was intelligent. More intelligent than we'd given it credit for. It had been planning something from the moment we'd arrived. The afternoon stretched endlessly. Lisa tried calling for help on her phone, but we had no signal this deep in the mountains. The CB radio Marcus had installed in the RV produced nothing but static. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of red and gold, I started to seriously worry about Jake and Marcus. They should have been back by now, even if they'd had to walk all the way to town. Maybe we should start walking, I suggested. Try to meet them on the road. And leave the RV? Lisa looked skeptical. This is the only shelter we have. But staying felt worse. The shadows were lengthening, and something about the approaching darkness filled me with dread. As if summoned by my fears, I heard footsteps outside the RV. "Jake!" I called out. "Marcus?" No answer. The footsteps circled the vehicle slowly, just as they had the night before. But now, in daylight, I could see a shadow passing by the windows. Tall. Too tall. Lisa grabbed my arm. "It's back." The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. The RV swayed slightly as if something very heavy was pressed against it. Then came the knocking. Not the random tapping of a branch in the wind, but a deliberate rhythm. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. "Don't answer it," Lisa whispered, though I hadn't been planning to. The knocking continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Scratching. Something was dragging claws or fingernails along the side of the RV, from front to back, slow and deliberate. The scratching stopped at the back window, the one near the small dining area where Lisa and I were huddled. Through the curtain, I could see a shadow, large and motionless. Then it spoke. Sarah. My name in a voice that might have been human if humans could speak with mouths full of gravel and broken glass. Lisa. It knew both our names. "Jake isn't coming back," the voice continued. "Marcus isn't coming back. They met me on the road." Lisa whimpered, a small sound she probably didn't realize she was making. "But you can come out," the voice said. "You can come out and play." I pressed my face against Lisa's shoulder, trying not to sob. The voice was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Not just the sound of it, but the rhythm, the emphasis, like something that had learned human speech by listening to recordings. "I know you can hear me, Sarah. I know you can hear me, Lisa. I've been watching you for so long. You're more interesting than the others." The shadows shifted outside the window. The others were afraid too quickly. They ran. Running spoils the game. Lisa's grip on my arm tightened until her fingernails broke skin. "But you're smart. You stayed. You're trying to understand. I like that." Something scraped against the roof of the RV. Footsteps. Too light for something that size, moving directly overhead. "Do you want to see what I did with your friends, Sarah? Do you want to see what I did with Jake? With Marcus?" The footsteps on the roof stopped directly above us. "They're hanging in the trees now, like Christmas ornaments, like wind chimes. When the breeze blows, they make such beautiful sounds." I couldn't help myself. I sobbed. "Oh, don't cry, Sarah. Don't cry. You'll be beautiful too. You'll make beautiful sounds." Something began pressing down on the roof, hard enough to make the RV's frame creak. The ceiling bowed inward above our heads. "I'm coming in now," the voice said conversationally. "I hope you're ready to play." The pressure on the roof increased. Metal groaned. I heard what sounded like claws puncturing the roof material. Lisa lunged for the driver's seat, key already in her hand. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. She threw the RV into drive and floored the accelerator. Whatever was on the roof wasn't expecting the sudden movement. I heard a thud and scrambling sounds as the RV lurched forward. Through the rear window, I caught a glimpse of something impossibly tall rolling to its feet in the road behind us. Lisa drove like a woman possessed. taking curves at speeds that should have rolled the ancient RV. I clung to whatever handholds I could find, expecting us to careen off the mountain at any moment. In the side mirror, I could see something following us. Not running, gliding somehow, moving through the trees parallel to the road with a fluid motion that defied physics. "It's keeping up," I shouted over the engine noise. "I can see it," Lisa screamed back. "Jesus Christ, I can see it." The thing emerged from the trees about a quarter-mile behind us, now running down the middle of the road. Its gait was all wrong. Too much hang time between steps, like it was covering 20 feet with each stride. And it was gaining. Lisa pushed the RV harder, but the old engine was already protesting. The temperature gauge climbed into the red zone. "It's going to catch us," I said, watching the thing close the distance between us with impossible speed. "No," Lisa said through gritted teeth. "No, it's not." The road ahead curved sharply to the right, with a steep embankment on one side and a deep ravine on the other. Lisa held her course until the last possible second, then yanked the wheel hard to the left. The RV tilted sickeningly, balanced on two wheels for what felt like an eternity, then crashed back down and shot off the road into the ravine. We bounced and tumbled through rocks and small trees, the RV's frame screaming in protest. Something sharp punched through the windshield. The ceiling lights shattered. Equipment flew around the interior like shrapnel. The RV finally came to rest wedged between two large boulders, tilted at a 45-degree angle. Steam hissed from the destroyed engine. I tasted blood and realized I'd bitten through my tongue. Lisa was slumped over the steering wheel, a gash on her forehead painting her face red. "Lisa!" I reached for her, my left arm hanging useless at my side. "Lisa, are you okay?" She stirred, groaned, tried to sit up. Is it gone?" I looked up through the shattered windshield toward the road above us. For a moment I saw nothing but twilight sky. Then a familiar silhouette appeared at the edge of the embankment looking down at us. It tilted its head, that horrible, impossible angle, and I heard laughter that sounded like breaking glass. Then it was gone. Lisa and I spent the night huddled in the wreckage of the RV, listening to things moving in the darkness around us. Not just one thing, several. They whispered to each other in voices that might once have been human, calling back and forth through the trees. Sometimes I thought I heard Jake's voice among them, sometimes Marcus's. When dawn finally came, the whispers faded. A park ranger found us around noon, drawn by the smoke still rising from the RV's engine. He helped us climb up to the road and called for medical assistance. While we waited for the ambulance, I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to me. The ranger listened politely, then told us that Jake Patterson and Marcus Williams had been found that morning, hanging from trees near the Dolly Sods trailhead. The official cause of death was listed as animal attack, though he mentioned quietly that he'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of working these mountains. Lisa and I gave our statements to the police, underwent medical treatment, and eventually returned to our normal lives. The blog was discontinued. None of us felt like writing about nature anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that voice calling my name. And sometimes, when I'm reviewing old photos on my computer, I notice something standing at the edge of the frame that shouldn't be there. Something tall and thin and impossibly still, always watching, always waiting. The trail cameras are still out there, somewhere in the Dolly Sods wilderness, still recording, still collecting images of anyone foolish enough to venture into those ancient, hungry mountains. I wonder what they've captured since we left. I wonder, and I try very hard not to dream about it. Because in my dreams, I can hear Jake and Marcus calling to me from the trees, their voices like wind chimes made of bone, asking me to come back and play. And sometimes, in the darkest part of the night, I find myself wanting to answer. Story 2. My name is Marcus, I'm 34, and the first mistake I made at Olympic National Forest was thinking a weekend with my 3 college buddies would be like old times. The parking area at Solduke Hot Springs Road felt emptier than it should have been for late September, but I chalked that up to luck. We'd driven up from Seattle in my new Winnebago. The four of us packed in like we were 20 again instead of pushing middle age with mortgages and divorces trailing behind us. Jake had been pushing for this trip for months, ever since his wife filed the papers. "One last hurrah before we all disappear into suburban hell," he'd said, though most of us were already there. Danny brought his expensive camera gear, planning to document our epic adventure for his Instagram followers. Ryan just brought beer and his usual skepticism about everything. The Salduke River gurgled nearby as we set up camp in a clearing about a quarter-mile from the main campground. "Private," Jake had insisted, away from families and their screaming kids. The trees pressed in thick around us, Douglas fir and western hemlock that blocked out most of the late afternoon sun. I'd parked the RV facing the river, thinking the sound would be peaceful. "This place gives me the creeps," Ryan muttered, cracking his third beer since we'd arrived an hour ago. He was staring up at the canopy where the branches interlocked so densely they looked like a net. "Everything gives you the creeps," Danny laughed, adjusting his camera settings. "Remember that time in Yellowstone when you were convinced that elk was stalking us? That elk was stalking us." Jake emerged from the RV with his own beer and a satisfied grin. "This is perfect, boys. No cell service, no wives, no bosses. Just us and nature, like it should be." I wanted to share his enthusiasm, but something felt off about the place. The silence was too complete. No bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush. Even the insects seemed to have abandoned this particular patch of forest. The only sound was the river and our own voices echoing strangely in the stillness. "Let's get some shots while the light's still good," Danny said, hoisting his camera. "Marcus, stand by the RV. Jake, get in there too. We need proof this actually happened." I posed reluctantly while Danny snapped away. Through the viewfinder, I watched him frown and check his camera settings. "Weird. The exposure keeps changing." He took another shot, then another. "It's like something's moving in the background, but..." He trailed off, staring at the small screen on the back of his camera. His face went pale. "What?" Jake asked. Danny held up the camera, showing us the digital display. In the first photo, all four of us stood clearly by the RV. In the second, there were only 3 of us. Jake was missing. In the third, Ryan had vanished too. The fourth showed just me, alone by the Winnebago. But there was something else in the shot now. A dark shape at the edge of the frame, tall and thin, that hadn't been there when he'd taken the picture. "Camera's malfunctioning," Ryan said quickly, but his voice cracked. "Digital glitch or whatever." Danny took another photo of the 4 of us standing together. This time, when he checked it, we were all there. But so was the dark figure, closer now, standing just behind Ryan's shoulder. "Let me see that," I said, grabbing the camera. The figure was definitely there in the image, but when I looked up at the spot where it should have been, there was nothing but trees. Jake laughed nervously. "Probably just a shadow or tree branch. These digital cameras pick up all kinds of artifacts." But Danny was shaking his head, scrolling through the photos he'd taken. "Look at this. Every picture I've taken today, we're disappearing, one by one." He was right. In chronological order, the photos showed us gradually vanishing from each shot. And in every image, that dark figure grew larger, more defined, creeping closer to whoever remained. "Delete them," Ryan said. "Delete all of them." "Are you insane?" Danny clutched the camera protectively. "This could be evidence of something incredible. Paranormal activity or a broken camera," Jake interrupted. "Come on, let's just enjoy the trip. Cook some food, drink some beer, tell lies about our glory days." But the photos had cast a shadow over everything. We went through the motions of setting up camp, but everyone kept glancing over their shoulders. I noticed Ryan was staying close to the RV, as if the metal walls offered some kind of protection. Danny continued taking pictures compulsively, checking each one with increasing agitation. As darkness fell, we built a fire in the ring I'd constructed from river stones. The flames pushed back the forest's oppressive darkness, creating a bubble of orange light that felt both comforting and vulnerable. Beyond the fire's reach, the trees stood like silent sentinels. "Remember sophomore year when we camped at Mount Rainier?" Jake asked, trying to recapture the mood. When that bear got into our food? That wasn't a bear, Danny said absently, still scrolling through his photos. That was you, drunk, raiding your own backpack at 3 a.m. The jokes fell flat. Even Jake seemed to be forcing his laughter. I found myself listening to the forest, straining to hear something beyond the river and the crackling fire. There was something else out there, a presence that made the hair on my neck stand up. I'm going to check the RV, I announced, standing up. Make sure everything's locked down. I'll come with you, Ryan said quickly. Inside the Winnebago, I flicked on the lights and checked the windows. Everything looked secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Ryan sat heavily on the fold-out couch, his beer forgotten in his hands. This was a mistake, he said quietly. We should pack up and leave first thing in the morning. Come on, don't let Danny's broken camera spook you. It's not just the camera. Ryan's voice dropped to a whisper. Haven't you noticed how quiet it is? No animals, no insects. Even the wind has stopped. It's like everything else knows to stay away from this place. Before I could respond, we heard Danny shouting from outside. We rushed back to the fire to find him standing over his camera, which lay smashed on the ground. What happened? I asked. It fell, Danny said, but his eyes were wild. I was looking at the photos again, and the figure, it was right behind Jake in the last shot. Right behind him. And when I looked up, he pointed at Jake's empty camp chair. Where is he? We all turned to stare at the vacant chair. Jake's beer sat half-finished on the armrest, still cold. Jake, Ryan called. Jake, where are you? No response. The forest swallowed our voices without even an echo. He probably went to take a piss, I said, but my mouth had gone dry. Jake, come on, man, this isn't funny. We searched the immediate area, calling his name. I grabbed a flashlight from the RV and swept it across the trees. The beam seemed to penetrate only a few feet before being absorbed by the darkness. Look, Danny said, pointing to the ground near Jake's chair. Footprints? He was right. Jake's boot prints led away from the fire toward the forest, but they were wrong somehow. The spacing was off, the gait too long, as if Jake had been taking enormous strides, or as if he'd been dragged. We need to follow them, I said. Are you crazy? Ryan grabbed my arm. We're not splitting up. That's how people die in horror movies. This isn't a movie. Jake could be hurt, lost, or worse. Danny's voice was barely audible. I saw the photos, Marcus. We were disappearing one by one, and that thing was getting closer. What if it got Jake? What thing? You're talking about shadows and a broken camera. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Something had taken Jake. Something that left footprints like a man but moved like a predator. We spent the night huddled in the RV, taking turns keeping watch. No one slept. Every creak of the metal walls, every whisper of wind through the trees made us jump. I kept the engine running, ready to flee at a moment's notice, but some part of me knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever was out there wasn't bound by the rules of the physical world. Dawn came slowly, filtered through the dense canopy into a gray, lifeless light. Jake hadn't returned. His footprints were still there, leading into the forest and disappearing about 20 yards from the campsite as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. We're leaving, I announced. Now. We'll drive back to town and call the authorities. Danny nodded gratefully, but Ryan was already shaking his head. We can't just abandon him. He's our friend. He's gone, Ryan. Whatever happened to him? You don't know that. Ryan's voice cracked with desperation. Maybe he fell and hit his head. Maybe he's lying unconscious somewhere. We have to look for him. Against my better judgment, we spent the morning searching. The three of us stayed close together, following Jake's trail as far as we could. It led deeper into the forest, winding between massive tree trunks and overfallen logs thick with moss. The further we went, the more oppressive the silence became. This doesn't make sense, Danny muttered, examining the ground. The footprints just stop here, like he disappeared. We were standing in a small clearing where the canopy opened up enough to let in some real sunlight. Jake's boot prints ended at the base of a massive Douglas fir, as if he'd walked straight into the tree and vanished. Maybe he climbed up, I suggested, looking into the branches above. Jake? The guy who's afraid of step ladders? Ryan shook his head. No way. I circled the tree looking for any sign of where Jake might have gone. On the far side, I found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the bark, about 7 feet up, were 4 sets of initials: MK, DL, RS, and JH. Our initials. Mine, Danny's, Ryan's, and Jake's. Guys, I called, my voice strangled. You need to see this. They joined me, staring up at the carved letters. Below our initials, someone had scratched a date. Tomorrow's date. That's impossible, Danny whispered. Those carvings look old, weather-beaten. They've been here for years, but they were fresh. I could smell the sap seeping from the wounds in the bark. Someone, or something, had carved them recently, within the last few hours. We're leaving, I said, right now. This time, even Ryan didn't argue. We raced back to the campsite, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs. My lungs burned from the effort, but terror drove me forward. Behind us, I could hear something following. Not footsteps exactly, but a rustling presence that seemed to flow through the forest like water. The RV came into view, and I felt a surge of relief. We were going to make it. We were going to get out of this nightmare, and I stopped short. Ryan and Danny nearly collided with me. The RV was empty. Not just unoccupied, empty. Our gear was gone. The fold-out table where we'd played cards the night before had vanished. The sleeping bags, the cooler, the camp chairs, everything had disappeared as if it had never existed. Where's our stuff? Danny's voice was high with panic. Where's everything? I ran to the RV and yanked open the door. The interior was bare. Not just our personal belongings, the built-in furniture was gone too. The dinette, the bed, the kitchenette, even the upholstery had been stripped away, leaving only a metal shell. This isn't possible, I muttered, running my hands over the empty walls. This isn't possible. Marcus? Ryan's voice was tight with fear. Look at this. I turned to find him standing by the fire ring. The stones I'd carefully arranged were still there, but inside the circle, instead of cold ashes, there was a neat pile of photographs. Danny's photographs. I knelt and picked them up with trembling hands. They were all there, every picture Danny had taken since we'd arrived. But something was wrong with them. In every image we were disappearing just as Danny had shown us, but now I could see what was replacing us. In the shots where Jake was missing, there was something else sitting in his chair. Something tall and thin, with 2 long limbs and a face that hurt to look at directly. In the photos where both Jake and Ryan were gone, there were 2 of these things. As more of us vanished from each successive image, more of the creatures appeared, until the final photograph showed 4 of them sitting around our campfire, wearing our faces like badly fitting masks. Oh, God, Danny whispered, looking over my shoulder. Oh, God. Oh, God. The last photograph in the pile was different. It showed the 3 of us standing exactly where we were now, looking at the photos. But in the background, just at the edge of the frame, I could see more figures, dozens of them, hundreds, all wearing human faces that didn't quite fit, and they were getting closer. I dropped the photographs and grabbed Ryan and Danny by their arms. Run! Run! We bolted toward the road, but the forest seemed to shift around us. Paths that should have led back to the parking area curved into dead ends. Trees that had been on our right appeared on our left. The river's sound came from every direction at once. We're lost, Ryan panted. We're fucking lost. No, I insisted, though I was beginning to suspect he was right. The road has to be this way. It has to be. We pushed through a wall of ferns and found ourselves back in the clearing with the carved tree. Our initials stared down at us, and now I could see that Jake's initials had been crossed out with deep gouges in the bark. They got Jake, Danny said, his voice hollow. Whatever they are, they got him. And they're getting us too, Ryan added. He pointed to the photographs scattered on the ground around the tree. The same photographs we'd just seen at the campsite. Look, I picked up the newest image. It showed only 2 figures now, Danny and me. Ryan was gone, replaced by another one of those things with the wrong face. I spun around. Ryan! Ryan! but he was gone. Not 10 seconds ago, he'd been standing right beside me, and now there was no trace of him except for the fading echo of his voice. Danny was hyperventilating, his face gray with terror. "It's happening. Just like in the photos. We're disappearing." "No." I grabbed him by the shoulders. "We're getting out of here. Both of us. Together." But even as I said it, I could feel the forest closing in around us. The trees seemed taller, their branches reaching down like grasping fingers. The silence was complete now. Even the river had gone quiet. "Marcus," Danny whispered. "Look." I turned to where he was pointing and saw them. The figures from the photographs. They stood between the trees, perfectly still, watching us with faces that were almost human but not quite right. Some wore Jake's features, others Ryan's. Their eyes were too large, their smiles too wide, their proportions subtly wrong in ways that made my brain recoil. "They're not real," I said, but my voice shook. "They can't be real." One of them stepped forward, the one wearing Jake's face. When it spoke, it used Jake's voice, but the words came from everywhere at once. "Come on, Marcus. Don't you want to join us? It's peaceful here, quiet, just like you wanted. You're not Jake. I'm exactly Jake, just improved, perfected." The thing's smile stretched impossibly wide. "And soon, you'll be exactly Marcus." More of them emerged from the forest. Dozens, just like in the photograph. They formed a circle around us, moving with fluid, inhuman grace. Some wore familiar faces. Jake, Ryan, people I recognized but couldn't place. Others had features that shifted and blurred, as if they couldn't decide which human mask to wear. "Danny," I whispered. "When I say run..." But when I looked, Danny was gone too. In his place stood another one of the creatures. This one wearing Danny's face but getting the details wrong. The eyes were green instead of brown, the hair parted on the wrong side. "Hello, Marcus," it said with Danny's voice. "I've been waiting to meet you." I was alone now, surrounded by things that wore human shapes like costumes. The circle began to close in, and I could smell something rank and organic, like meat left too long in the sun. "What do you want?" I asked. "To be," the Jake thing replied. "To exist. To walk in the world above. And all we need," added the Danny thing, "is to borrow your face." I ran. I crashed through their circle, feeling cold fingers brush my arms as I passed. Behind me, I heard them laughing with voices I recognized. Jake's booming laugh, Ryan's nervous chuckle, Danny's wheeze. But the sounds were wrong, layered and distorted as if played through broken speakers. The forest became a maze of identical trees and endless shadows. I ran until my lungs screamed, but no matter which direction I chose, I kept finding myself back at the same clearing, the same carved tree, the same scattered photographs. On my fourth return, I noticed something new. A fifth set of initials had appeared below the others. MK, carved deep and fresh. My own initials. And like Jake's, they had been crossed out. I picked up the latest photograph from the pile at the base of the tree. It showed an empty clearing. No one at all. But standing in the background, just visible between the trees, was a figure wearing my face, and getting it completely wrong. That's when I understood. We hadn't just been camping in their territory. We'd stumbled into their collection, a place where they gathered the faces they'd stolen, the identities they'd borrowed. And now they had mine too. I tried to run again, but my legs felt heavy, distant. Looking down, I saw that my feet were no longer quite touching the ground. I was becoming like them. Not quite solid, not quite real. The circle of creatures watched me with patient interest as I struggled against whatever force was claiming me. The Jake thing stepped forward, its smile now perfectly matching my friend's. "Don't fight it, Marcus. It doesn't hurt. You just stop being you and start being us." "Where are they?" I demanded. "Where are my friends?" "Gone," it replied simply. "Used up. But don't worry, we'll take good care of their faces." I felt myself fading, becoming translucent. Soon, I would be like them, wearing human features but lacking whatever spark made them real. Just another collector of faces, waiting in the forest for the next group of campers to wander too far from safety. But something in me refused to surrender. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 34 years of being Marcus Kellerman. Whatever it was, I grabbed onto it and pulled. The world snapped back into focus. My feet hit solid ground. The creatures stepped back, their perfect human masks flickering with surprise. "Impossible," the Danny thing hissed. "You're ours now." "No." I backed toward the tree, feeling the rough bark against my shoulders. "I'm not. I don't know what I did next, or how I did it. Maybe it was touching something real, the living wood of that ancient Douglas fir that anchored me. Maybe it was pure desperation. But suddenly, I could see past their masks, past the borrowed faces, to what they really were. They were empty. Not evil, not malevolent. Just hollow. Shadows that had learned to wear light but had never truly contained it. They existed only as reflections of the people they mimicked, and without those stolen identities, they were nothing at all. "You can't have them," I said. "They're not yours to take." "They came willingly," the Jake thing protested, but its voice was weaker now, less certain. "Bullshit. Jake would never abandon his friends. Neither would Ryan or Danny. You took them." I stepped forward, and the circle of creatures stepped back. For the first time, they looked afraid. "Give them back." "We can't," the Danny thing said. "They're part of us now." "Then you're part of them too." I reached out and grabbed the Jake thing's hand. The moment we touched, I felt it. Jake's memories, his emotions, everything that made him real, but trapped inside this hollow shell, growing fainter by the moment. "Jake," I called, "I know you're in there. Fight it." For a second, the creature's features shifted. Instead of the too perfect mask, I saw Jake's real face, scared, confused, but still recognizably him. "Marcus?" His voice was weak, distant. I can't remember. Remember sophomore year, the camping trip when you got us lost for 3 days because you insisted you knew a shortcut." Jake's eyes focused. "And we survived on nothing but trail mix and stream water. And Ryan complained the entire time. And Danny documented every miserable moment." Jake's smile was real now, human. "God, we were idiots." The shell around him began to crack. Light seeped through the fissures. Not reflected light, but something generated from within. The other creatures shrieked and recoiled as if the illumination burned them. "Now, Ryan," I called. "Remember the time you talked us into driving to Vegas for spring break, and we spent the whole weekend in the hotel room playing poker because we were too broke to gamble?" Another shell cracked. Ryan's voice, weak but real. And Jake kept insisting he was going to win it all back. "Danny, remember your first camera? That piece of crap film camera you carried everywhere senior year?" "Still got better pictures than my phone," Danny's voice whispered from inside his mask. The clearing filled with real light, not the gray, filtered illumination of the forest, but warm, golden sunlight. The creatures screamed and began to dissolve, their stolen faces melting away to reveal the emptiness beneath. But my friends remained, solid and real, themselves again. "Run!" I shouted. Before they... The world shattered like glass. I woke up in a hospital bed in Port Angeles, sunshine streaming through the window. A nurse was checking my IV, and a police officer sat in the corner, notepad ready. "Welcome back, Mr. Kellerman," the nurse said. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Where are my friends? Jake, Ryan, Danny. Are they okay?" The officer leaned forward. "Sir, you were found alone in your RV on Sol Duke Hot Springs Road. There was no sign of your friends. According to the campground registry, you checked in by yourself." "That's not possible. We drove up together. We were camping. Mr. Kellerman, we found no evidence that anyone else was ever in your RV. No extra sleeping bags, no additional supplies, nothing. And there are no records of your friends taking time off work or leaving Seattle." I tried to explain what had happened, but even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how insane they sounded. Creatures that stole faces, photographs that showed the future, friends who vanished from reality itself. "Stress," the doctor said later. combined with carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty ventilation system in your RV. It can cause vivid hallucinations, false memories. You're lucky you're alive. They kept me for observation for another day, then released me with a prescription for anxiety medication and a referral to a therapist. The RV was impounded as evidence, though evidence of what, no one seemed sure. I tried to find my friends when I got back to Seattle. Jake's number was disconnected. Ryan's apartment building had no record of him. Danny's social media accounts didn't exist. It was as if they had never been real, never been part of my life. But I knew they had been. I could remember 20 years of friendship, shared experiences, inside jokes. They were real, and something had taken them. Not just their lives, but their very existence. I still have one piece of evidence, though the doctors dismiss it as another hallucination. In my wallet, behind my driver's license, is a photograph. It shows 4 young men standing in front of a college dormitory, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. I'm on the left. The other 3 faces have been carefully scratched out, but I can still make out their names written on the back in fading ink. Jake Harrison, Ryan Salisbury, Danny Langford. Sometimes, late at night, I take out the photograph and stare at those scratched-out faces. And sometimes, just for a moment, I can almost see them smiling back at me. Real, human smiles. Not the too perfect masks of things that hunt in the deep forest. But those moments never last. The scratches always return, and I'm left alone with a photograph of 3 friends who never existed, according to the rest of the world. I know what really happened, though. I know there are things in the Olympic National Forest that collect faces like trophies, things that can steal not just your life, but your very reality. And I know that somewhere, in some shadowy space between the trees, creatures are still wearing the faces of my friends, learning to be human. The doctors say I'm better now. The medication has helped with the hallucinations, the false memories. I've been camping several times since then, day trips only, never overnight, and nothing strange has happened. But I never go alone. And I always bring a camera, an old film camera, the kind that can't be manipulated or corrupted. I take pictures constantly, checking each shot immediately after developing. Because sometimes in the background of those photos, I can see them. 3 figures standing just at the edge of the frame, wearing faces that almost look like my friends. They're always watching, always waiting, and in every photograph I take, there's one less person in the foreground. It's only a matter of time. Story 3. My name is Marcus. I'm 34, and I waved at the only cabin in Devil's Backbone State Natural Area, and something waved back from the wrong window. The RV lurched over another pothole as we descended into the Arkansas wilderness, and I caught Sarah's white-knuckled grip on the dashboard in my peripheral vision. Behind us, our 10-year-old daughter Emma was absorbed in her tablet, oblivious to her mother's anxiety about our destination. Devil's Backbone had been my choice, a remote camping spot in the Newton County wilderness where cell towers couldn't reach and the nearest town was 40 miles of winding mountain roads away. "You sure this place even exists?" Sarah asked, studying the hand-drawn map the local gas station attendant had sketched on a napkin. The official state park maps showed nothing but blank green space where we were headed. "Old Jim at the station seemed to know it well enough," I replied, though his reaction when I'd mentioned Devil's Backbone had been odd. The weathered man had gone quiet for a long moment, then slowly drawn the map with shaking hands, mumbling something about keeping to the marked trails and not staying past Sunday. Emma looked up from her screen. "Are we almost there, Dad? I'm getting carsick." The gravel road narrowed as we climbed higher into the Ozark Mountains, and I had to fight the RV's wheel as loose stones pinged against the undercarriage. Ancient oaks pressed close on both sides, their branches creating a canopy so thick that dappled afternoon light barely penetrated to the forest floor. The temperature gauge climbed steadily as we ascended, and I could hear the engine straining against the grade. "There," Sarah pointed ahead to where the trees opened into a small clearing. "Is that it?" The campground, if you could call it that, was nothing more than a flat patch of earth bordered by towering pines. A weathered picnic table sat at one end, its surface scarred by decades of carved initials and knife marks. An old fire ring made of stacked stones occupied the center, filled with cold ashes and what looked like animal bones. But what caught my attention was the structure at the far end of the clearing. The cabin squatted among the trees like a malignant growth, its logs dark with age and moisture. Most of the windows were boarded up, but one on the second floor remained uncovered, its glass reflecting the dying afternoon light like a watchful eye. As our RV rolled to a stop, I raised my hand in a neighborly wave and froze as something in that upper window moved, a pale shape that seemed to return the gesture. "Did you see that?" I asked Sarah, but she was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "See what? Come on, let's get set up before dark. This place gives me the creeps." I stared at the window, but whatever I'd seen was gone. Just an empty black square now, revealing nothing of the cabin's interior. We spent the next hour setting up camp, leveling the RV and connecting the utilities. Emma explored the perimeter of our site with the fearless curiosity of childhood, poking at mysterious holes in the ground and collecting interesting rocks. Sarah busied herself organizing our supplies, a nervous habit I'd learned to recognize over 15 years of marriage. "Mom, what's that thing over there?" Emma called from near the tree line. I looked up from adjusting the awning to see her pointing toward a gap in the pines about 50 yards away. Something tall and dark stood among the trees, partially hidden in shadow. "Probably just an old snag," Sarah said, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty. I walked over to get a better look, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a scarecrow, but not the cheerful garden variety kind you'd expect to find protecting a vegetable patch. This thing was grotesque, at least 7 feet tall, constructed from what appeared to be actual bones lashed together with ragged strips of cloth. Its head was a grinning deer skull, empty sockets staring blindly toward our campsite. The clothes hanging from its frame were so old and tattered they might have been burial shrouds. "What the hell is that doing out here?" I muttered, taking a step closer. The scarecrow's position was odd. It faced our camping area directly, as if deliberately placed to watch over our site. Weather-stained rope secured it to a massive oak tree, and at its base I could make out what looked like a circle of stones with strange symbols carved into them. "Marcus, come help me with the grill," Sarah called, and I reluctantly turned away from the disturbing figure. That evening, we cooked hot dogs over the fire ring while Emma roasted marshmallows on a green stick she'd found. The bones I'd noticed earlier turned out to be from rabbits and squirrels. Probably left by previous campers, I told myself, though they seemed oddly arranged in geometric patterns. "Tell us a ghost story, Dad," Emma begged as darkness settled over the clearing. I was about to launch into a familiar tale when a sound drifted from the forest. A low, rhythmic creaking like an old rocking chair on a porch. Sarah's head turned toward the noise, her expression troubled. "What is that?" she whispered. The creaking came from the direction of the scarecrow, and as I listened, I realized it was the sound of rope stretching under weight, as if something heavy was swaying in the wind. But there was no wind. The air hung perfectly still, heavy with the scent of pine sap and something else, something organic and unpleasant. "Probably just the trees settling," I said, but even Emma looked skeptical. The creaking continued for several minutes, then abruptly stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard Sarah draw a sharp breath. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely audible. "Look at the cabin." I turned to follow her gaze and felt ice water flood my veins. A pale light flickered in the upper window. Not electric, but the wavering glow of a candle or lantern. As we watched, the light moved from window to window, as if someone inside was walking through the rooms carrying a flame. "Is somebody living there?" Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. Before I could answer, the light disappeared. The cabin returned to its previous state of dark abandonment, giving no sign that anyone had ever been inside. "Maybe we should pack up and find somewhere else to camp," Sarah suggested, but I shook my head. "We're fine here. It's just an old building. Could be kids messing around, or maybe a homeless person took shelter. Nothing to worry about." But as I spoke the words, I didn't believe them myself. Something about this place felt fundamentally wrong, as if we'd stumbled into territory where we weren't welcome. We retreated to the RV earlier than planned, and I made sure to lock all the doors and windows. Emma fell asleep quickly in the dinette conversion, but Sarah and I lay awake in our bed, listening to the forest sounds outside. Owls hooted in the distance, and occasionally I heard the snap of a breaking branch or the rustle of something large moving through the underbrush. Around midnight, Emma started talking in her sleep. Not the usual mumbled nonsense of childhood dreams, but clear, coherent sentences that made my skin crawl. "He's coming down from the tree," she said in a flat, emotionless voice. "His bones are clicking together. Click, click, click." Sarah sat up beside me, her hand finding my arm in the darkness. Emma's sleep-talking had never been this vivid or disturbing. "The tall man wants his clothes back," Emma continued. "He's been waiting so long, in the cold ground." I was about to wake her when she fell silent, returning to normal sleep breathing. Sarah and I lay there for a long time afterward, straining our ears for any sound that might match what our daughter had described. But the forest had gone unnaturally quiet, as if every creature within miles was holding its breath. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke to the sound of scratching against the RV's exterior wall. It started as a gentle scraping, like tree branches moving in wind, but gradually became more deliberate and rhythmic. Sarah was already awake beside me, her body rigid with tension. "Something's outside," she whispered. The scratching moved along the length of the RV, pausing at each window as if whatever was making the sound was trying to peer inside. Our blackout curtains prevented us from seeing out, but I had the uncomfortable feeling that something was studying the vehicle's exterior, learning its layout and vulnerabilities. When the scratching reached the door, it stopped. We held our breath, waiting. Then came 3 deliberate knocks. Not the random bumping of an animal, but the purposeful rap of knuckles against aluminum. Emma stirred in her bed but didn't wake. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Then a voice drifted through the door, thin and reedy, like wind through dry leaves. "Let me in," it said. "So cold out here. Been waiting so long." Sarah's nails dug into my arm. The voice was wrong, too high and whispery to be human, with an odd echo as if it was coming from somewhere deep and hollow. "Please," the voice continued. "Just want my clothes back. Someone took my clothes." I thought of the scarecrow's tattered garments and felt my heart hammering against my ribs. The thing outside began to circle the RV again, but now I could hear its footsteps. An odd, uneven gait accompanied by a clicking sound, like bone against bone. "Click, click, click," Emma murmured in her sleep, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The sounds continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, they faded into the distance, moving back toward the forest. Sarah and I didn't speak for the rest of the night, but neither of us slept. Morning brought no relief. I emerged from the RV to find muddy footprints circling our campsite, if you could call them footprints. They were more like impressions of bare bone, each print showing the distinct outline of metatarsals and phalanges pressed into the soft earth. The prints led from the tree line, around our RV, and back to where the scarecrow stood. But the scarecrow had changed. Where before it had been facing our campsite, it now stood with its back to us, skull turned toward the dark forest beyond. Its clothes, the same tattered rags I'd seen yesterday, were gone. The bone framework stood naked against the pine trees, white and gleaming in the morning sun. Sarah took one look at the empty scarecrow and the muddy prints and started packing immediately. "We're leaving," she announced. "Right now. I don't care about the money we paid or the reservation. We're getting out of here." But as I tried to start the RV, the engine turned over weakly and died. The battery gauge showed a full charge, but something was clearly wrong with the electrical system. I popped the hood to investigate and found the problem immediately. Every wire had been severed, cut with surgical precision. The damage was extensive and deliberate. "Someone sabotaged it," I told Sarah, my voice hollow with the implications. Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Maybe the tall man did it. He doesn't want us to leave until he gets his clothes back." "Emma, honey, there's no tall man," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. I tried my cell phone, but the screen showed no signal bars. We were completely cut off from the outside world, stranded in a place where something had made it clear we weren't welcome. "We could hike out," I suggested, studying the hand-drawn map. "It's only 8 miles to the main road." Sarah looked at our daughter, then at the surrounding wilderness. 8 miles through dense forest with a 10-year-old wasn't impossible, but it would be challenging. And something told me that whatever was stalking us wouldn't simply let us walk away. "Let's try the cabin," I said. "Maybe whoever's living there can help. Or at least let us use a phone." Sarah's expression made it clear what she thought of that idea, but we didn't have many options. The 3 of us approached the dilapidated structure together, Emma staying close between her parents. The cabin was even more unsettling up close. The logs were so old they'd turned black with age and rot, and I could see gaps between them wide enough to stick my fist through. The front porch sagged under the weight of years, and the few remaining roof shingles hung at odd angles like broken teeth. I knocked on the door, or what remained of it. The wood was so weathered that my knuckles barely made a sound. "Hello?" I called. "Anyone home? We need help." No answer. I tried the handle and found it unlocked. The door swung open with a prolonged creak that seemed to echo through the interior. "I don't think we should go in there," Sarah said, but I was already stepping across the threshold. The smell hit me immediately. Not just the mustiness of abandonment, but something else underneath. Something sweet and cloying that reminded me of flowers at a funeral. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. "Dad, look," Emma whispered, tugging at my shirt. She was pointing at the wall beside the door, where dozens of photographs had been tacked to the rotting wood. The pictures were old, some black and white, others faded color prints that looked like they'd been taken decades ago. They all showed people camping in this same clearing, families posing by RVs and tents, children playing around the fire pit, couples embracing in front of the cabin. But every single person in the photographs had been scratched out. Their faces were obliterated by deep gouges in the paper, as if someone had attacked the images with a knife or their fingernails. Names were written below each photo in a spidery hand. The Johnsons, 1987. Miller family, 1993. Tom and Janet, 2001. "Jesus," I breathed, scanning the dozens of defaced images. How many people had camped here over the years? And what had happened to them all? At the bottom of the display, I found a photo that made my blood freeze. It was recent, taken with a digital camera and printed on modern photo paper. It showed our RV parked in the clearing, taken from the perspective of someone standing in the forest. Sarah and Emma were visible as small figures near the fire pit, but I was nowhere to be seen. Below the photo, in that same spidery handwriting, someone had written, "The Chen family, 2023. Except Emma and I were Harrisons, not Chens. Sarah was a Chen before we married, but she'd taken my name years ago." "Who took this picture?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Before I could answer, we heard a sound from upstairs, a slow, deliberate creaking, as if someone was walking across the floor above us. The ceiling sagged with each footstep, and small bits of debris drifted down like snow. Emma pressed closer to my leg. "Someone's up there, Dad." The footsteps moved from one end of the cabin to the other, then stopped directly over our heads. We stood frozen in the silence that followed, barely daring to breathe. Then something began to scratch at the ceiling, the same sound we'd heard outside the RV the night before. "We need to leave," Sarah said. "Now." But as we turned toward the door, it slammed shut with tremendous force. The whole cabin shook, and I heard wood splintering as if the frame had been driven deep into the door jamb. I threw my shoulder against it, but it wouldn't budge. The scratching above us grew louder and more frantic, joined by a sound that raised the hair on my neck. Laughter. High and thin and utterly inhuman, it echoed through the cabin's rotting walls like the cries of a dying animal. "The window," I said, pointing to the single unboarded opening on the ground floor. But as I approached it, a face appeared in the glass. Pale and gaunt, with hollow sockets where eyes should be. It was the deer skull from the scarecrow, but now it seemed horribly alive, the jaw working soundlessly as if trying to speak. Emma screamed, and the skull face pressed closer to the glass, leaving smears of condensation that looked disturbingly like handprints. The laughter from upstairs intensified, and I could hear more footsteps now. Multiple sets, as if a crowd of people was moving around on the second floor. "The back door," Sarah said, pointing toward what looked like a kitchen area. We pushed through the debris-filled room, past a table set for a meal that had never been eaten. Moldy food still sat on the plates, and candles burned with flames that cast no light. Their wax pooled into grotesque shapes that resembled reaching fingers. The back door was in worse condition than the front, barely hanging on its hinges. I kicked it open and we stumbled out into the forest behind the cabin, gasping the clean mountain air like drowning swimmers breaking the surface. "Run," I said, taking Emma's hand. "Back to the RV." But as we circled around the cabin, I realized we had a bigger problem. The forest around us had changed. Where before there had been clear paths and recognizable landmarks, now everything looked the same. Endless ranks of identical pine trees stretching in every direction. The clearing where our RV was parked had vanished as if it had never existed. "Which way?" Sarah asked, turning in a slow circle. "I can't tell where we came from." Emma pointed through the trees. "That way, Dad. I can see the tall man." I followed her gaze and felt my heart stop. The scarecrow stood about 40 yards away, still naked and bone-white against the dark trees. But it was no longer tied to its oak tree. It stood free, and as I watched, it began to walk toward us with that same clicking gait we'd heard the night before. "Run," I said again, more urgently this time. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, I could hear the scarecrow following. Not running, but moving with relentless purpose, its bone feet clicking against stone and root. No matter which direction we turned, it seemed to anticipate our movements, cutting through the forest to intercept our path. Emma was the first to tire, her small legs unable to maintain the pace. I scooped her up and continued running, but the extra weight slowed me down considerably. The clicking sounds grew closer, and I could hear something else now. A wet, tearing noise, as if the scarecrow was ripping its way through the vegetation. "There," Sarah gasped, pointing ahead to where the trees thinned slightly. "I think I see the clearing." She was right. Through a gap in the pines, I could make out our RV sitting exactly where we'd left it. We burst from the forest and ran toward it, but as we approached I noticed something that made me stumble to a halt. Another RV sat beside ours, an older model with faded paint and flat tires. Its door hung open, revealing an interior thick with spiderwebs and decay. Personal belongings were scattered around the campsite. A child's bicycle, camping chairs, a cooler full of food that had long since rotted to black sludge. "The Johnsons, 1987, I whispered, remembering the name from the photograph. More campsites became visible as my eyes adjusted. Dozens of them, arranged in rough circles around the clearing like offerings to some hungry god. RVs, tents, even a few pop-up campers, all in various states of decay. Some were little more than rusted frames and torn fabric, while others looked like they'd been abandoned only recently. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah breathed. A sound from the forest answered her question. The clicking was getting closer, and now I could see movement among the trees. Not just the scarecrow, but other figures as well. Tall, pale shapes that moved with the same jerky, unnatural gait. They emerged from the forest in a rough line, surrounding our campsite. There were 7 of them in total, and as they stepped into the clearing I realized with horror what they were. These weren't scarecrows at all. They were people, or had been people. Their skin was bone-white and stretched tight over skeletal frames, and their eyes were empty black sockets that seemed to drink in light. They wore the tattered remains of camping clothes, hiking boots, flannel shirts, even a child's Disney t-shirt that was far too small for the elongated body wearing it. The original scarecrow, the one we'd seen tied to the oak tree, stood at the center of the group. It was taller than the others, its deer skull gleaming with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. When it opened its mouth, that thin, reedy voice drifted across the clearing. "Welcome to Devil's Backbone," it said. "So glad you could join us. We've been waiting such a long time for new friends." The other creatures began to circle our campsite, moving with predatory patience. Emma was crying now, pressing her face against my chest to block out the sight of them. "What do you want?" I called out, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The skull thing tilted its head, considering the question. "Want? We want what everyone wants, Marcus. We want to belong somewhere, to have a family, to be remembered. How do you know my name? We know all the names. Every family that's ever visited our home. The Johnsons, the Millers, Tom and Janet, the Chens." It paused, and I could swear I saw those empty sockets focus on Sarah. "Oh yes, we know about Sarah Chen. How she ran away from home when she was 16. How she changed her name and never looked back." Sarah made a small, wounded sound. She'd told me about her troubled relationship with her parents, but I'd never known the full story. "How could you possibly—" she started to say, but the creature cut her off. "We know because she's been calling to us, Marcus. For years, every time she looks in the mirror and sees her father's eyes looking back. Every time she lies awake wondering if she made the right choices. The guilt calls to us like a beacon." The other creatures had stopped circling and now stood in a perfect ring around our campsite. Up close, I could see that their bone-white skin wasn't skin at all. It was some kind of fungus or mold, growing over their flesh in thick, fibrous mats. "We offer absolution," the skull thing continued. "Freedom from regret, from the weight of choices, from the burden of memory. All we ask in return is that you stay with us, forever." "And if we refuse?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. The creature's jaw hinged open in what might have been a smile. "Look around you, Marcus. How many families do you see? How many refused our generous offer?" I glanced at the scattered campsites, the abandoned RVs, and felt despair wash over me. Dozens of families had found their way to this place over the decades. None had ever left. "There is another option," the skull thing said, its voice taking on an almost gentle tone. "One person can choose to stay willingly, and the others may go free. We need new blood to keep our family strong." Sarah's hand found mine, her fingers interlacing with a desperation that spoke volumes. Emma was still crying, but quietly now, as if she sensed that any sound might tip the balance toward disaster. "I'll stay," Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely audible. "No," I said immediately. "Absolutely not." "It makes sense, Marcus. It's my past that brought them here. My guilt that called to them." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Take Emma and go. Get her somewhere safe." The skull thing clapped its hands together with a sound like breaking branches. How touching. But I'm afraid the choice isn't quite that simple. It gestured to the other creatures and they began to move closer. "You see, we've grown quite fond of your little family. Sarah would make an excellent addition to our group, but Emma... Oh, Emma has such potential. Do you know she's been talking to us in her sleep? Such wonderful conversations we've had." My blood turned to ice. Emma's sleep-talking. The strange things she'd said about the tall man and clicking bones. She'd been in contact with these things all along. "Children adapt so much better than adults," the skull thing continued. "They don't fight the change as hard. They accept their new family with such grace." Emma lifted her head from my chest and I saw something that made me want to scream. Her eyes were no longer brown. They'd turned completely black, like the empty sockets of the creatures surrounding us. "It's okay, Daddy," she said in a voice that was hers but not hers, with that same hollow echo I'd heard from outside the RV. "They're not scary once you get to know them. They just want us to stay and be their family." Sarah stumbled backward as if Emma had struck her. "Oh God, what have they done to her?" "Nothing she didn't want," Emma replied, her dark eyes fixed on something beyond the circle of creatures. "I've been so lonely, Mommy. At school, at home, everywhere. But they understand loneliness. They understand what it's like to be forgotten." The skull thing nodded approvingly. "Children are so much wiser than adults give them credit for. Emma has already chosen to join us. The question is whether her parents will make the same choice, or if they'll abandon their daughter to strangers." I felt the trap closing around us with the inexorable weight of a landslide. These creatures, whatever they were, had been working on Emma since we arrived, possibly even before. They'd sabotaged our RV to keep us from leaving, and now they were using our daughter against us. There has to be another way, I said desperately. There is, the Skull Thing replied. You can all choose to stay willingly. Become part of our family. Live forever in this beautiful place, free from the pain and disappointment of the outside world. And if we refuse? The creature's jaw unhinged wider, revealing rows of yellowed teeth that definitely hadn't come from any deer. Then you'll stay anyway, but the transformation will be less pleasant. Around us, the other creatures began to make sounds, low moans and whispers that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. I realized they were trying to speak, possibly to tell us their own stories, but the fungal growth had consumed too much of their vocal apparatus to make coherent words. Emma stepped out of my arms and walked toward the Skull Thing with no trace of fear. I want to stay, Daddy. I want to belong somewhere. Emma, no, Sarah said, reaching for our daughter, but one of the creatures stepped between them. A woman in a moldy hiking outfit who might once have been someone's mother. Let her choose, the Skull Thing said. She's old enough to decide her own fate. As Emma approached, the creature knelt down to her level, bringing that horrific deer skull face close to hers. When it spoke, its voice was softer, almost paternal. Are you ready to join us, little one? Emma nodded solemnly. Will it hurt? Only for a moment. Then you'll never hurt again. The Skull Thing reached out with hands that were too long and had too many joints, fingers ending in yellowed claws. As they touched Emma's forehead, I heard her gasp, not in pain, but in what sounded almost like relief. The change began immediately. Emma's skin started to pale, taking on that same bone-white fungal texture as the creatures around us. Her hair began to fall out in clumps, drifting to the ground like autumn leaves. But the worst part was her expression. She looked happy, more content than I'd ever seen her. Emma, I called out, but she didn't respond. Her attention was entirely focused on the Skull Thing, as if it was the most fascinating creature she'd ever encountered. Sarah made a desperate lunge toward our daughter, but two of the creatures grabbed her arms, their grip strong enough to bruise. Let me go, she screamed. Let me go to her. It's too late for that, the Skull Thing said without looking away from Emma. The transformation has begun. She belongs to us now. But as it spoke, I noticed something. The other creatures were focused entirely on Emma and Sarah, leaving me relatively unguarded. My mind raced, trying to think of anything that might turn this situation around. The bone fragments in the fire pit, the symbols carved into the stones around the Scarecrow's original position, the photographs in the cabin. They all suggested some kind of ritual or binding. The Skull Thing had said the families were called here by guilt and regret. Sarah's past, Emma's loneliness, even my own failures as a husband and father. They'd been like a beacon, drawing these creatures to us. But if they were bound by ritual, maybe that ritual could be broken. I thought about the Scarecrow's missing clothes, how the creature had circled our RV asking for them back. The tattered garments weren't just decoration. They were part of the binding, physical anchors that kept these things tied to this place. Moving as slowly and casually as I could manage, I backed toward the fire pit. The creatures were so focused on Emma's transformation that they barely noticed my movement. Sarah's struggles had everyone's attention, and she was putting up enough of a fight to provide excellent cover. The fire pit was exactly as we'd left it, filled with cold ashes and what I now realized were the bones of previous visitors. But scattered among the remains, I could see fragments of cloth, pieces of the same tattered garments that had adorned the Scarecrow. This was where they burned the clothes, completing whatever ritual bound new souls to their collective. I grabbed a handful of the cloth fragments and held them up. "Looking for these," I called out. The Skull Thing's head snapped toward me with a sound like breaking vertebrae. Those empty sockets fixed on the fabric in my hands, and for the first time, I heard genuine alarm in its voice. "Put those down," it commanded. "They don't belong to you." "Then come and take them," I replied, backing toward the tree line. The creature released Emma and started toward me, moving with that same clicking gait but much faster now. The others followed, abandoning Sarah to converge on my position. I had maybe seconds before they reached me. I pulled out my lighter, an old Zippo that had been my father's, and held the flame to the cloth fragments. They caught immediately, burning with an unnatural blue fire that cast everything in stark, hellish relief. The effect on the creatures was immediate and devastating. They began to scream. Not the thin, reedy voices they'd used before, but deep, anguished cries that seemed to come from the very earth itself. Their bone-white skin started to blacken and crack, and I could see the fungal growth writhing beneath the surface as if it was being consumed from within. The skull thing reached me, just as the last of the cloth turned to ash. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my shirt and drawing deep furrows in the skin beneath, but its strength was already fading. The deer skull cracked down the middle, and something dark and viscous leaked from the fissures. "You don't know what you've done," it gasped, collapsing to its knees. "This place needs guardians, needs someone to keep the darkness contained." Around us, the other creatures were falling apart, their forms dissolving into puddles of organic matter that steamed and bubbled in the cool mountain air. Only Emma remained unchanged, standing in the middle of the clearing with her skin still pale but no longer fungal. I ran to her and scooped her into my arms, feeling for a pulse, checking her breathing. Her eyes were still black, but as I watched, brown began to seep back into them like coffee through cream. "Daddy," she said in her normal voice. "What happened? I feel weird." "You're okay," I told her, holding her tight against my chest. "You're going to be okay." Sarah joined us, her arms wrapping around both Emma and me. "Is it over? Are they gone?" I looked around the clearing and saw that it was already changing. The abandoned campsites were fading like mirages, leaving only empty forest. Our RV sat alone now, exactly as it had when we first arrived. Even the cabin was gone, leaving only a foundation of old stones half buried in fallen leaves. But something was wrong. The skull thing's words echoed in my mind. "Keep the darkness contained." What darkness? What had we unleashed by destroying the guardians of this place? The answer came as the sun began to set behind the mountains. From deep in the forest, something howled. Not the cry of any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard, but something far older and more primal. It was answered by another howl from a different direction, then another, until the hills echoed with a chorus of inhuman voices. "We need to leave," I said, carrying Emma toward the RV. "Right now." But when I tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over. The sabotaged wiring would take hours to repair, and darkness was falling fast. The howling was getting closer, and I could see shapes moving between the trees, things that were definitely not the bone-white creatures we'd just destroyed. "The cabin foundation," Sarah said, pointing to where the old stones still lay. "Maybe we can make some kind of shelter." We gathered what supplies we could carry and made our way to the ruins. The stones formed a rough rectangle about 12 feet by 8, and there were enough loose rocks scattered around to build low walls. It wasn't much, but it might provide some protection from whatever was coming. As we worked, Emma helped gather stones, her strength and coordination surprisingly good for someone who'd just undergone a partial supernatural transformation. But I noticed she kept stopping to stare into the forest, as if she could see things the rest of us couldn't. "There are more of them out there," she said quietly. "Different ones. Hungry ones." "More of what, honey?" "I don't know what they're called, but they've been waiting for the guardians to go away. Now they can come closer to the road, to the towns." She looked up at me with eyes that were definitely her own again, but held depths that hadn't been there before. "The bone people weren't the bad guys, Daddy. They were trying to protect everyone from the things that lived deeper in the mountain." The howling grew louder, and I could hear branches snapping as something large crashed through the underbrush. Sarah finished stacking the last of the stones and crouched beside Emma, her face pale in the dying light. "What kind of things?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "The first people. The ones who were here before anyone else. They're not dead like the bone people were. They're still alive, and they're very, very angry." A sound drifted from the forest that made my skin crawl. Not howling this time, but something that might have been laughter if laughter could express pure malevolence. It was answered by similar sounds from multiple directions, as if we were surrounded by a pack of things that found our situation amusing. "We should have listened to the Skull Man," Emma continued. "He was trying to warn us. The families that came here, they weren't prisoners. They were volunteers. They stayed to keep the old things locked away in the deep places." "Locked away how?" Sarah asked. "By being here. By watching. The old things can't come out if someone's watching them. It's like a rule, or a spell, or something." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she was explaining a game she'd learned at school. "But now there's nobody watching, so they can come out and hunt." The crashing sounds were getting closer. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of movement. Shapes that seemed too large and moved in ways that defied anatomy. One passed close enough to our makeshift shelter that I could see it clearly, and immediately wished I hadn't. It stood at least 9 feet tall, with arms that reached nearly to the ground and legs that bent backward like a bird's. Its skin was dark and rough like tree bark, and its face was a nightmare fusion of human and animal features. Too many teeth, eyes that reflected light like a cat's, and a nose that was more like a wolf's muzzle. But the worst part was its smell. The cloying sweetness of rotting meat mixed with something else, something that reminded me of burned hair and sulfur. The thing stopped just outside our circle of stones and tilted its head, studying us with obvious intelligence. When it opened its mouth, the voice that emerged was surprisingly human, almost conversational. "Well, well, look what we have here. The little guardians are gone, and new meat has taken their place." It licked its lips with a tongue that was far too long and appeared to be forked at the end. "How thoughtful of you to gather yourselves together like this. Saves us the trouble of hunting you down one by one." More shapes emerged from the forest surrounding our position. There were at least a dozen of them, all variations on the same theme. Bipedal predators that had once been human but had changed into something else entirely. Some were covered in coarse fur, others had scales or feathers. A few had additional limbs or heads, as if they'd absorbed other creatures into their own bodies. "What are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The first creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We are the original inhabitants of these mountains, little morsel. We were here when your kind first crawled out of their caves and learned to make fire. We watched your civilizations rise and fall, always patient, always hungry. The Native Americans called us by many names," another creature added, this one resembling a massive bear that walked upright. "Wendigo, Sebe, Kachitwashku. But we prefer to think of ourselves as recyclers. We take the failed experiments of evolution and improve them." Emma stepped closer to me, her small hand finding mine. "They want to change us," she whispered, "like they changed themselves. But they can't do it here, in the Guardian place. We have to leave the stones." "Then we don't leave," I said firmly. The first creature overheard and grinned, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Oh, but you will, little Guardian. You see, we have something you want." It gestured to the forest behind it, and 2 more creatures emerged, dragging something between them. My heart stopped as I realized what it was. A man in hiking gear, bloodied and barely conscious, but still alive. "Found this one about 2 miles down the trail," the creature said casually. "Claims he's looking for his family. A wife and daughter who went camping and never came home. Sound familiar?" Sarah gasped. "That's impossible. We just got here yesterday." "Time moves differently in the deep places," the creature replied. "What seems like days to you might be weeks or months in the outside world. Your family has been missing for quite some time, I'm afraid." The injured man raised his head, and I saw that it was indeed someone I recognized. A park ranger who'd given us directions at the visitor center when we'd stopped to register our camping plans. How long ago had that been? My memories felt fuzzy, uncertain, as if I was trying to recall a dream. "Please," the ranger gasped. "Help me. They killed the others. Tore them apart just for fun." "We don't kill for fun," the creature corrected with mock indignation. "We kill because it's our nature. Just as you kill animals for food, we kill humans for improvement." This one will make an excellent addition to our family, once we've had time to properly modify him. Let him go, I said. Take me instead. Marcus, no, Sarah protested, but I was already stepping toward the edge of our stone circle. Ah, the noble sacrifice, the creature mused. How predictable. But I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. You see, we need all of you. The man for his strength, the woman for her fertility, and the child for her unique properties. What unique properties? Sarah demanded. The creature's eyes fixed on Emma with predatory intensity. She's been touched by the guardians, hasn't she? Partially transformed, but not completed. That makes her perfect for our purposes. A bridge between the old ways and the new. Emma squeezed my hand tighter. They want to use me to make more guardians, but their kind, not the bone people's kind. They want to spread out from the mountains. The pieces clicked together in my mind with horrible clarity. The creatures needed Emma's partially transformed state to create new guardians under their control. Beings that could watch and wait in other locations, keeping the barriers thin between the deep places and the civilized world. They weren't just predators. They were conquerors, planning to expand their territory one camping ground at a time. You're not taking her, I said, pulling Emma back toward the center of our stone circle. Then you'll all die here, the creature replied with a shrug. Makes no difference to us. Dead meat, live meat, it all tastes the same after a few hours of aging. The pack began to move closer, testing the boundaries of our makeshift shelter. But as they approached the stone circle, something strange happened. The creatures slowed, then stopped, as if they'd hit an invisible wall. The first creature snarled and lashed out with one massive clawed hand, but the blow stopped inches short of the stones. Interesting, it muttered. The old bindings still hold some power, but circles of protection require sacrifice to maintain them. How long do you think you can hold out without food or water? It was a good question. We had some supplies in our backpacks, but not enough for more than a day or two. And the creatures showed no signs of leaving. If anything, more of them were arriving, drawn by some signal I couldn't perceive. There might be another way, Emma said quietly. What do you mean? Sarah asked. The bone people told me things while I was changing, about how the guardians work, about the rules that keep the old things locked away. Emma's voice took on that eerie, adult quality I'd noticed before. The protection isn't really about the stones. It's about the watching. As long as someone is here, really here, paying attention to what the old things are doing, they can't fully manifest in the human world. So we just have to stay and watch them forever? I asked. Not forever, just until sunrise. The old things can only hunt in darkness. When the sun comes up, they have to return to the deep places until the next new moon. I checked my watch and felt my heart sink. It was barely 8 o'clock. We had at least 10 hours until dawn. The creatures seemed to sense my dismay and began to laugh, a sound like breaking bones and screaming wind. "Oh yes, little guardian," the first creature said. "We have all night to play with you, and we so enjoy our games." They settled in around our position, some perching in the trees like enormous vultures, others pacing back and forth just outside the stone circle. The injured ranger was dragged closer and left where we could see him clearly, a reminder of what would happen to us if we tried to leave our sanctuary. As the night wore on, the creatures began their psychological assault. They told us stories of the families they'd captured over the years, describing in vivid detail how each person had been changed or consumed. They spoke of cities they planned to visit once they had enough guardian slaves to maintain their expanded territory. And always they focused on Emma, describing the wonderful things they would do to her unique physiology. Emma handled it better than Sarah or I did, maintaining an almost supernatural calm as the hours crawled by. She seemed to be listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear, occasionally nodding or whispering responses to unspoken questions. Around midnight, she tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, I need to tell you something important." "What is it, honey?" "The bone people aren't really gone. They're still here, just sleeping. The burning of their clothes broke the binding that kept them in physical form, but their spirits are still connected to this place." "Can they help us?" Sarah asked. "Maybe, but only if we're willing to take their place permanently. Become the new guardians, for real this time. Emma's eyes had gone completely black again, but somehow it didn't seem as frightening as before. It wouldn't be like what the creatures want to do to us. We'd still be ourselves, mostly. We'd just be tied to this place. Forever. The weight of that choice settled over us like a burial shroud. Eternal imprisonment in this haunted forest. Or death and transformation at the hands of the creatures surrounding us. Neither option offered much hope for a normal life. There's a third choice, Emma continued, but it's dangerous, and it means one of us doesn't make it home. What kind of choice? I asked, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. One person stays behind as a guardian. Really stays, not just until sunrise. Becomes like the bone people were, keeping watch over the old things. The other two go free, but they have to promise never to come back, never to tell anyone else about this place. Sarah and I exchanged looks. The unspoken question hung between us. Which one of us would make that sacrifice? "I'll stay," I said immediately. "No," Sarah replied just as quickly. "I'm the one who brought this on us. My guilt called them here. It should be me." "Actually," Emma said in a voice that was no longer entirely her own, "it should be me." Before either of us could protest, she stepped out of the stone circle. The creatures reacted immediately, lunging toward her with claws and teeth bared. But as they reached her position, something extraordinary happened. Emma's form began to shimmer and change, taking on the bone-white appearance of the original guardians but retaining her own face and personality. "I was already partially transformed," she said, her voice now carrying that hollow echo we'd heard from the skull thing. "The change was never fully reversed. This is just completing the process." The creatures stopped their attack, apparently as surprised as we were. The first creature snarled and spoke. "Clever little morsel, but one guardian isn't enough to hold us. The old bindings required at least 7. "Then it's good thing I'm not alone," Emma replied. 6 more figures materialized around the clearing. The original guardians, called back from whatever realm they'd retreated to when their physical forms were destroyed. They looked exactly as they had before, bone-white and elongated. But now I could see them for what they really were. Protectors, standing eternal watch against an evil far worse than anything they'd ever done to visiting families. The skull thing stepped forward, its cracked deer skull somehow managing to convey approval. "Welcome to the watch, little sister. Your parents are free to go, but the bargain must be kept. They can never return, never speak of what they've seen." The creatures of the deep places began to retreat, howling their frustration as the renewed guardian circle forced them back into the shadows. But before they vanished entirely, the first creature fixed its burning gaze on Sarah and me. "This isn't over," it promised. "We know your scent now, your essence. And there are other thin places, other weak spots where the barriers can be broken. We'll find you again." Then they were gone, fading into the forest like smoke on the wind. Emma, or what Emma had become, turned to face us one last time. She still looked like our daughter, but there was an ageless quality to her features now, a sense of vast responsibility and eternal vigilance. "You have to go now," she said sadly, "before the sun comes up. If you're still here at dawn, you won't be able to leave." Sarah was crying, reaching out toward our transformed daughter but not quite daring to touch her. "Emma, baby, isn't there another way?" "This is the way it has to be, Mommy, but it's not forever. When I'm older, much older, someone else will come to take my place. That's how it works. The guardians aren't prisoners, they're volunteers." I knelt down to Emma's level, fighting back tears of my own. "Will we ever see you again? Maybe. If you're very careful and very quiet, you might be able to visit the edges of the guardian places. But never here, never this deep. Promise me." "I promise," I said, though the words felt like glass in my throat. "I love you both," Emma said, stepping back into the circle of guardians. "Now go, please, before I lose my courage." The walk back to our RV was the longest of my life. Somehow, the sabotaged wiring had repaired itself, and the engine started on the first try. As we drove away from Devil's Backbone, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, hoping for one last glimpse of our daughter, but the forest had already swallowed her up, claiming her for its own eternal purposes. We never spoke of what happened in those mountains, not to each other, not to the police who questioned us about Emma's disappearance, not to the grief counselors who tried to help us process our tragic loss. The official story was that she'd wandered away from our campsite and gotten lost in the wilderness. Search teams scoured the area for weeks but found no trace of her. Sarah and I divorced 2 years later. The weight of our shared secret, combined with the grief of losing Emma, proved too much for our marriage to survive. She moved back to California, taking her maiden name again as if she could somehow undo the choices that had led us to that cursed place. I stayed in Arkansas, partly because I couldn't bear to move further away from where Emma was keeping her eternal watch, partly because someone needed to monitor the situation. I took a job with the State Park Service and made it my mission to keep other families away from the thin places, the weak spots where reality grew permeable and ancient things stirred in their sleep. It's been 7 years now since that night at Devil's Backbone. 7 years of carefully redirecting camping permits, of accidentally blocking access roads during new moon periods, of spreading rumors about dangerous wildlife and unstable geology to keep people away from areas where they shouldn't go. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the moon is dark and the forest is quiet, I drive up into the mountains and park at the edge of the Guardian territories. I don't get out of the car. I promised Emma I wouldn't, but I sit there in the darkness and listen. If I'm very quiet and very patient, I can sometimes hear her voice on the wind. Still young, still brave, still watching over a world that will never know what she sacrificed to keep it safe. And in those moments, the guilt and grief and loss almost feel worth it. Because I know that somewhere in the deep places, ancient hungry things prowl and rage against the barriers that keep them contained. And standing guard against that darkness, keeping eternal watch with the wisdom of a child and the strength of the damned, is my daughter Emma. She's not lost. She's exactly where she needs to be. And God help us all if she ever stops watching. Story 4. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 34, and I brought my boyfriend Marcus to the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas thinking it would save us. The ranger joked, "You'll be fine," and kept the punchline. We'd been fighting for months. Small things that grew teeth, who forgot to pay the electric bill, why he couldn't remember my sister's birthday, the way I chewed ice when I was nervous. But underneath, something larger festered. Marcus had been distant since his father's funeral in February, disappearing into work or his phone or long silences that filled our apartment like smoke. "We need this," I'd said, booking the RV rental online. "Just us, no distractions." Marcus had shrugged, which was becoming his default response to everything I suggested. But he'd packed his bag, and that felt like hope. The Winnebago smelled like industrial disinfectant and someone else's vacation. Marcus drove while I navigated, the GPS signal cutting in and out as we wound deeper into the Arkansas hills. The trees grew denser, their canopy blocking out more and more sky until driving felt like moving through a green tunnel. "There," I said, pointing to a weathered sign. Whispering Pines Campground. 2 miles. The road narrowed to gravel, then dirt. Branches scraped the RV's sides with fingernail sounds. Marcus hunched over the wheel, jaw tight with concentration. "Maybe we should have picked somewhere more accessible," he muttered. "It'll be perfect," I said, though the trees seemed to press closer with each turn. Remote. Private. The campground was a clearing carved from the forest, maybe a dozen sites marked by concrete pads and rusted fire rings. Only 2 other RVs were visible, a massive fifth-wheeler at the far end and a small travel trailer that looked like it hadn't moved in years. A hand-painted sign read, "Check in at office," with an arrow pointing toward a log cabin that might have been charming once. The office door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, camping brochures from the 1990s gathered dust on a counter scarred with coffee rings. A bell sat beside a clipboard, and when I rang it, the sound seemed to get swallowed by the wood-paneled walls. "Hello," I called. A door in the back opened, and a man emerged. 60s, maybe older, with the kind of sun-weathered face that came from decades outdoors. His ranger uniform was faded and ill-fitting, like he'd borrowed it from someone larger. "Help you folks?" His voice carried the slow rhythm of rural Arkansas. "We have a reservation. Chen, Site 12. He consulted a ledger that looked older than I was, running a thick finger down columns of cramped handwriting. Chen. "Yeah, here you are. 3 nights. That's right." He looked up, studying us with pale eyes that seemed to catalog everything. Marcus's expensive hiking boots that had never touched a real trail, my carefully coordinated camping outfit, the obvious city softness that marked us as outsiders. "You'll be fine," he said, then smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, the kind that made you wonder what joke you'd missed. Site 12 sat at the forest's edge, where the clearing surrendered to towering oaks and pine. Marcus backed the RV into position while I directed, both of us snapping at each other over minor adjustments. The familiar rhythm of our dysfunction, now with an audience of trees. "That's good," I called, and Marcus cut the engine. Silence settled over us like dust. No traffic, no neighbors, no city hum to fill the spaces between words. Just the whisper of wind through leaves and the distant creek we'd crossed coming in. "It's quiet," Marcus said, stating the obvious. "That's the point." We spent the afternoon setting up, awning extended, camp chairs arranged, citronella candles strategically placed. Marcus connected the electrical and water while I organized the interior. Normal domestic tasks that should have felt comfortable but instead highlighted how carefully we'd learned to move around each other, avoiding the tender spots. As sunset approached, I suggested a walk to explore the area. The campground sat in a natural bowl, surrounded by forested hills that rolled away in all directions. A trail marker near our site indicated a path to Natural Spring, 0.8 miles, and another pointed toward Overlook Trail, 2.2 miles. "Let's try the spring," I said. "It'll be nice to see water." The path was well maintained initially, marked with blue blazes painted on trees. We walked single file, Marcus behind me, our footsteps muffled by decades of fallen leaves. The forest felt ancient here, with trees so large that 3 people holding hands couldn't circle their trunks. "When I was a kid," I said, trying to fill the silence, "my dad took us camping every summer. I always loved that first night smell. Wood smoke and pine needles and that clean air you can't get in the city." Marcus responded, his standard non-committal sound. I stopped walking. "Are you even trying? What do you mean? This whole weekend, this whole us. Are you actually trying, or are you just going through the motions?" Marcus stepped around a fallen branch, considering his words carefully. He'd always been deliberate that way, which I'd once found attractive. Now it felt like procrastination. "I'm here," he said finally. "Your body is here. Where's the rest of you?" Before he could answer, we rounded a bend and saw the spring. A natural pool, maybe 15 feet across, fed by water that bubbled up from somewhere deep underground. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the canopy above like black glass. Moss covered the rocks around the edges, and the air carried the mineral smell of deep earth. "It's beautiful," I admitted. Marcus nodded, but he was looking past the spring, deeper into the forest. "What's that?" I followed his gaze. Maybe 50 yards past the spring, partially hidden by trees, stood what looked like the ruins of an old stone structure, waist-high walls forming a rough circle, with what might have been a well at the center. "Probably some old homestead," I said. "This whole area was settled in the 1800s. We walked closer. The stonework was crude but solid, fitted together without mortar. The well in the center was maybe 4 feet across, its mouth surrounded by a low stone wall. I leaned over to look down, but the darkness swallowed my vision after just a few feet. "Hello, down there," I called, my voice echoing strangely. The echo came back wrong somehow. Not quite the same words, not quite the same voice. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly. I looked at him. He was staring at the well with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear, exactly, but something close. Recognition, maybe. like he'd been here before. "We should go back," he said. "Why? It's just some old—" "Please." The urgency in his voice surprised me. Marcus wasn't dramatic, wasn't given to sudden impulses or irrational fears. If anything, he was too steady, too logical, too willing to explain away anything that couldn't fit into neat categories. "Okay," I said. We walked back to camp in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet now, charged, full of questions neither of us wanted to ask. That night we grilled burgers on the fire ring and opened a bottle of wine. The citronella candles cast wavering circles of light that pushed back against the forest darkness. Other than the distant hum of generators from the other RVs, we might have been alone on the planet. "Remember our second date?" I asked, trying to recapture some warmth between us. "That terrible Italian place in Midtown?" Marcus smiled for the first time all day. "The waiter spilled wine on your white dress, and you gave me your jacket to wear home. It smelled like your cologne for weeks. I was so nervous I could barely eat. You seemed so confident. I was terrified you'd figure out I was a fraud." I reached across the small camping table and took his hand. "What kind of fraud?" "The kind who doesn't deserve someone like you." The words hung between us, heavier than I'd expected. Marcus's hand was warm in mine, calloused from weekend woodworking projects he'd abandoned when his father got sick. "Marcus!" A sound from the forest cut me off, distant but clear, the metallic clang of something hitting stone. Once, then again. We both turned toward the trees, listening. "Probably just a camper," I said, though the sound had come from the wrong direction, deeper in the forest where there were no campsites. "Yeah," Marcus agreed, but he didn't let go of my hand. The sound came again, rhythmic now. Clang, pause, clang, pause. Like someone dropping a coin down a very deep well. "We should go inside," Marcus said. I wanted to argue, to point out that we were supposed to be camping, supposed to be connecting with nature and each other. But something in his voice, in the way his grip tightened on my fingers, made me nod instead. Inside the RV, we tried to pretend everything was normal. Marcus found a book, some thriller he'd been meaning to finish, while I organized gear we'd already organized. Through the thin walls, the forest sounds seemed amplified. Wind through leaves, the distant call of an owl, the creak of tree branches. And underneath it all, so faint I might have been imagining it, that steady, metallic rhythm. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Marcus looked up from his book. "Hear what?" I listened more carefully. Nothing but forest sounds and the RV's air conditioning cycling on. Never mind. We went to bed early, the RV's bedroom barely large enough for the queen-sized mattress. Marcus fell asleep quickly. He'd always been able to do that, switch off like a machine. But I lay awake, listening to the darkness beyond our thin walls. The clanging had stopped, but something else had replaced it. A sound I couldn't quite identify. Rhythmic but organic, like breathing, or like water lapping at the edges of something hollow. I must have dozed eventually because I woke to find Marcus gone. His side of the bed was cold, the sheets thrown back. Pale light filtered through the RV's small windows. Not quite dawn, but close. "Marcus," I called softly. No answer. I pulled on yesterday's clothes and stepped into the main cabin. The door hung open, letting in the cool morning air and the smell of dew-heavy forest. Marcus's shoes were gone from beside the entrance. Outside, our campfire had died to cold ashes. The camp chairs sat empty in the gray pre-dawn light, and beyond them, the forest waited like a held breath. "Marcus!" I called louder. A sound to my left made me turn. The man from the office stood at the edge of our campsite, that same too-knowing smile creasing his weathered face. "Morning," he said. "You folks okay? Heard some calling. Have you seen my boyfriend? He's not in the RV. Tall fellow? Dark hair?" The ranger nodded toward the forest. "Saw him heading toward the spring trail maybe an hour ago. Said he couldn't sleep. An hour. Marcus had been gone an hour without telling me." "Thanks," I said, then hesitated. "Is it safe out there? At night, I mean." The ranger's smile widened slightly. "Depends what you're afraid of, I suppose." What do you mean? Forests full of things that might spook city folks. Coyotes mostly. Maybe a bear if you're unlucky. But the real dangerous things... He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Well, they're usually the ones that look safest. Before I could ask what he meant, he touched the brim of his hat and walked away, disappearing between the trees with surprising quiet for such a large man. I went back inside and pulled on hiking boots, grabbed a water bottle and flashlight. The sun was climbing now, painting the forest canopy in shades of gold and green. Birds called from the branches, and somewhere nearby a woodpecker hammered against dead wood. Normal sounds, daylight sounds, nothing to be afraid of. The trail to the spring looked different in morning light, more inviting, less mysterious. I walked quickly, calling Marcus's name every few hundred yards. The forest swallowed my voice, giving back only echoes that seemed to come from the wrong directions. The spring, when I reached it, was empty. The water reflected the sky like a perfect mirror, and dragonflies traced lazy patterns above the surface. But there was no sign Marcus had been here. I followed the edge of the pool, looking for footprints in the soft earth. Nothing clear. The ground was too rocky, too covered in fallen leaves. But something had disturbed the moss on the far side, crushing it down in a pattern that might have been boot prints. The pattern led toward the stone ruins. I found Marcus sitting on the low wall that surrounded the old well, staring down into its depths. His back was to me, shoulders hunched in the same posture he'd adopted in the months after his father's death, like he was carrying something too heavy to set down. "Marcus!" He didn't turn around. I walked closer, my footsteps loud on the fallen leaves. "Hey, I was worried about you. How long have you been out here?" Still no response. But as I got closer, I could hear him mumbling something under his breath. A rhythmic chant or prayer in a language I didn't recognize. "Marcus, what are you doing?" When I touched his shoulder, he finally turned. His face was slack, eyes unfocused like he'd just woken up, or like he was sleepwalking. "Sarah?" His voice sounded strange, hoarse like he'd been talking for hours. "What time is it?" "Almost 8. You've been gone since before dawn. I was scared something happened to you." He looked around as if seeing the ruins for the first time. How did I get here?" "You don't remember coming out here?" "I remember waking up, feeling like I needed some air. But then..." He rubbed his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt on his skin. "It's fuzzy, like a dream you can't quite hold on to." I helped him to his feet, noting how his jeans were stained with moss and mud. His hands were dirty too, fingernails black with soil. "What were you saying? When I walked up, you were mumbling something." "Was I?" Marcus frowned. "I don't remember talking." As we walked back toward the trail, I glanced over my shoulder at the well. In the morning light, it looked ordinary enough, just old stones arranged in a circle, partially filled with decades of fallen leaves. But something about it bothered me. Some detail that didn't fit. It wasn't until we were halfway back to camp that I realized what I'd seen. The leaves inside the well weren't brown and brittle like the ones covering the forest floor. They were fresh, green, like they'd just fallen. Marcus spent the rest of the morning in the RV, claiming a headache. I sat outside reading, but my attention kept drifting to the forest. Twice I could have sworn I saw movement between the trees. Not animal movement, but something more deliberate. Human-shaped shadows that disappeared when I looked directly at them. The other campers remained invisible. No sounds from their sights, no movement around their vehicles. For all I could tell, Marcus and I were alone in these woods. Around noon, I decided to walk to the office and ask about hiking trails farther from camp. The building looked even more run down in daylight, its logs gray with age and split by decades of weather. The door stood open, but the interior was empty. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I stepped inside, noting the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams that slanted through dirty windows. The logbook on the counter was open to a page filled with entries, but the dates were all wrong. Some from the 1990s, others from years that hadn't happened yet. Behind the counter, a door marked "Private" stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see what looked like living quarters. A narrow bed, a table covered with papers, and something else that made me lean closer. Maps covered one wall, but they weren't standard topographical charts. These were hand-drawn, filled with symbols I didn't recognize. Circles and triangles connected by dotted lines, with notations written in the same careful script as the logbook. Most of the symbols were concentrated around what looked like our section of the campground. A floorboard creaked behind me. "Find what you were looking for?" I spun around. The ranger stood in the doorway, backlit by noon sun. I was just looking for trail information. The door was open. Always is during the day. He walked past me to close the private door, but not before I caught another glimpse of those strange maps. "You folks thinking of doing some exploring?" "Maybe. My boyfriend's not feeling well, but I thought I might take a short hike." "Lot of trails out there." He pulled a photocopied map from a stack beneath the counter, but it was different from the ones I'd seen on his wall. Sanitized, showing only the official marked trails. "Stick to these and you'll be fine. Some of the old paths, well, they don't go where you think they're going." "What do you mean?" That smile again. "Forest's bigger than it looks on maps. Easy to get turned around if you're not careful." I took the map and left, walking quickly back to our site. The feeling of being watched followed me, pressing between my shoulder blades like a physical weight. Twice I stopped and turned around, but saw only trees and shadows. Marcus was sitting outside when I returned. Color back in his face, but something still off about his expression. Distant, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Feeling better?" I asked. "Yeah, much." I was thinking maybe we should explore more of the area. That spring was interesting. "You want to go back there? This morning you seemed—" I searched for the right word. "Unsettled." Did I? I don't really remember. He stood and stretched, joints popping. "Come on, let's check out those ruins more carefully. Might be historically significant." The suggestion surprised me. Marcus had never shown much interest in history or architecture, but the idea of spending time together, actually doing something instead of tiptoeing around each other's moods, appealed to me. "Okay," I said, "but let's bring water and snacks, and maybe a camera." The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy as we walked the familiar path to the spring. Marcus seemed more like himself, talkative, engaging, making observations about the forest ecosystem and the geology of the area. It was like someone had flipped a switch, returning him to the man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. "Look at these oaks," he said, running his hand along the ridged bark of an enormous trunk. "Some of these are probably 200 years old. They were here when the first settlers came through." The ranger mentioned the forest is bigger than it looks. I got the feeling he was trying to warn me about something. "Warn you about what?" "I'm not sure. He had these maps in his office, not like regular hiking maps. Lots of symbols and notations I didn't understand." Marcus had stopped walking. "What kind of symbols?" "Circles, triangles, lines connecting them." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, staring deeper into the forest. "No reason, just curious." We reached the spring and continued to the ruins. In afternoon light, the stone structure looked even older than I'd first thought. The mortar between the stones had crumbled away completely in places, and several of the walls showed gaps where stones had fallen. Moss and small ferns had colonized every horizontal surface. Marcus walked directly to the well and leaned over the edge. "It's deep," he said. "Really deep." I joined him, peering down into the circular opening. The stonework continued below ground level, disappearing into blackness. When I dropped a pebble into the opening, I counted at least 5 seconds before hearing the faint splash of it hitting water. "Weird place for a well," I observed. "Pretty far from where the house would have been." "Maybe it's not a well," Marcus said. "Maybe it's something else." "Like what?" Instead of answering, he began walking around the perimeter of the ruins, studying the stonework with the intensity he usually reserved for work problems. I followed, noting details I'd missed before. Symbols carved into some of the stones, so weathered they were barely visible. Grooves in the rock that might have been decorative or might have had some other purpose. "Sarah," Marcus called from the opposite side of the circle. "Come look at this." He was crouched beside a section of wall that had partially collapsed. Among the tumbled stones, something glinted in the filtered sunlight. Marcus brushed away leaves and dirt, revealing what looked like metal. Not iron or steel, but something that hadn't rusted despite decades of exposure to the elements. "Don't touch it," I said instinctively. "Why not?" But he pulled his hand back anyway. "I don't know. This whole place feels wrong somehow, like we're intruding." Marcus stood and walked back to the well. "You know what I think this is?" he said. "I think it's Native American. Pre-Columbian, maybe. A sacred site." "What makes you say that?" "The construction style. The location, high point near a water source, and those symbols on the stones, they could be petroglyphs." It was possible. The Ozarks had been home to various indigenous peoples for thousands of years before European settlement. But something about Marcus's certainty bothered me. He was guessing, but stating his theories like facts. "We should probably leave it alone then," I said. "Show some respect." Marcus nodded, but he was still staring down into the well with that same fixed intensity from the morning. "Can you hear that?" "Hear what?" "Water moving, like it's flowing somewhere." I listened carefully but heard only the usual forest sounds. Wind through leaves, distant bird calls, the whisper of air currents moving through the stone ruins. "I don't hear anything. It's faint, like an underground stream." He was right that there might be water moving below ground. Many of the springs in this region were connected to vast cave systems that honeycombed the limestone beneath the Ozark Mountains. But I couldn't hear what he was hearing. "Marcus, maybe we should head back. It's getting late." The sun was indeed lower than I'd expected, already beginning to slant through the trees at the steep angle that meant evening was approaching. But when I checked my watch, it was only 3:30. "Just a few more minutes," Marcus said. He was kneeling beside the well now, leaning over the edge as if trying to see deeper into the darkness. "Marcus?" He didn't respond. His shoulders were perfectly still, and I realized I couldn't see his chest rising and falling. He might not have been breathing at all. "Marcus!" I grabbed his arm and pulled him back from the edge. He fell backward onto the moss-covered stones, blinking like someone waking from a deep sleep. "What happened?" he asked. I don't know. You wouldn't respond when I called your name." He sat up slowly, looking around as if seeing the ruins for the first time. "How long were we here?" "Maybe an hour. It feels longer." He rubbed his eyes. "I keep having these weird thoughts, like memories that aren't mine." "What kind of memories?" "I don't know how to explain it. Images of this place, but different. The stones are newer, and there are people here, wearing, I don't know, old-fashioned clothes, and they're doing something around the well. Some kind of ceremony." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm afternoon air. "Marcus, that's just your imagination. This place has atmosphere. It's easy to let your mind wander." "Maybe." He stood and brushed dirt from his jeans. "But it feels real. More real than being here with you right now." The words stung more than they should have. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that." We walked back to camp in uncomfortable silence. The sun was setting by the time we reached our site, painting the forest canopy in shades of red and gold. Marcus started a fire while I prepared dinner, both of us moving carefully around each other like strangers sharing space. "I found something interesting at the office today," I said as we ate. "The ranger has these maps on his wall, hand-drawn, with symbols marking different locations." What kind of symbols?" I couldn't get a good look, but they seemed focused on this area of the campground. Marcus set down his fork. "Did you ask him about them?" "No. He caught me looking and closed the door. But he seemed, I don't know, like he was keeping secrets. Maybe he was just protecting someone's privacy. Those might have been personal maps." "Personal maps of what?" Marcus shrugged. "Property boundaries, hunting spots, could be anything." His dismissive tone irritated me. The Marcus I knew would have been curious about mysterious maps, would have wanted to investigate further. This version seemed determined to explain away anything unusual. "I think we should leave tomorrow," I said. "Why?" "We paid for 3 nights." "Because something's wrong here. With this place, with you. You've been acting strange since we arrived, and it's getting worse." Marcus stared at me across the picnic table. In the firelight, his face looked different somehow. Sharper, more angular. The shadows fell wrong, creating the impression of cheekbones higher than they should be. Eyes set deeper in his skull. "I feel fine," he said. "Better than I have in months, actually. You don't remember wandering off this morning. You were talking to yourself at those ruins. And just now, you said being here feels more real than being with me. I was just confused, tired. This place is restorative, peaceful." "Peaceful?" I gestured toward the forest that pressed close around our campsite. "Marcus, I felt like I'm being watched since we got here. There are strange sounds at night, and the other campers are invisible. When's the last time you saw another person besides that ranger? Other people come here to get away from crowds, same as us. No, not the same as us. We came here to fix our relationship, and instead, you're disappearing into some fantasy about ancient ceremonies and underground streams." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. Sparks drifted upward into the darkening sky. "What if we're not here to fix anything?" he said finally. "What if we're here for something else? What does that mean? I don't know. But sometimes I feel like I was supposed to come here, like something's been calling me." The words sent ice down my spine. "Calling you from where?" "The well." He said it matter-of-factly like he was talking about the weather. But the firelight caught his eyes, and for just a moment they reflected the flames like an animal's. "Marcus, you're scaring me." "Am I?" He tilted his head, studying me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Or are you scaring yourself?" I stood up from the table. "I'm going inside." "Sarah, wait." But I was already walking toward the RV, my heart hammering against my ribs. Behind me, Marcus called my name, but I didn't turn around. I needed space, needed walls between me and the forest and whatever was happening to the man I thought I knew. Inside the RV, I locked the door and closed all the blinds. Then I sat on the bed and tried to think rationally about what I'd experienced. Marcus was under stress. The death of his father, work pressure, our relationship problems. It made sense that he might be having some kind of breakdown. And remote places could affect people strangely, especially city dwellers who weren't used to the isolation. But that didn't explain the sounds I'd been hearing, or the feeling of being watched, or the ranger's cryptic warnings. I pulled out my phone to call my sister, thinking that talking to someone grounded in normal reality might help. But there was no signal, not even one bar. The screen showed "no service" in the corner where the carrier name should be. A soft knock on the RV door made me jump. "Sarah, can we talk?" Marcus's voice put something off about the tone. Too formal, like he was reciting lines. "I'm tired," I called back. "Let's talk in the morning. Please, I want to apologize for earlier. I know I've been acting strangely." I walked to the door but didn't unlock it. "Are you feeling better?" "Much better. Clearer. I think I understand what's been happening to me." "What do you mean? This place, it has a history, a purpose. I think I'm sensitive to it somehow." "Marcus, that doesn't make sense, doesn't it? You said yourself that something feels wrong here. What if it's not wrong? What if it's just different from what we're used to?" I pressed my forehead against the door. The metal was cool against my skin. "Can we please just go home tomorrow? We can work on our problems there." "Our problems aren't about us, Sarah. They're about me not knowing who I was supposed to be. But here I can feel it. My real purpose. Your real purpose is being a software engineer in Atlanta. You have a life there. We have a life there. Do we? Or do we have a routine that we've been confusing with a life?" The question hit too close to something I'd been trying not to think about. How many evenings had we spent in the same chairs, watching the same shows, having the same abbreviated conversations? How long had it been since we'd really looked at each other, really talked about anything that mattered? "Marcus, please come inside. Let's figure this out together." Silence from the other side of the door. I waited, counting my heartbeats. "Marcus?" No response. I cracked the door open and peered out. The campsite was empty, our fire burning down to coals. Marcus's chair sat abandoned, still warm when I pressed my palm to the fabric. "Marcus!" I called, but the forest swallowed my voice. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the edge of our campsite, playing the beam across the tree line. Nothing moved in the circle of light, but beyond it, darkness pressed close like a living thing. The rational part of my mind said to go back inside, lock the door, and wait for morning. Marcus was an adult. He could take care of himself, but a deeper instinct, something that bypassed logic entirely, said he was in danger. I followed the path to the spring, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. The forest felt different at night, more alive, more aware. Branches seemed to reach toward me as I passed, and every shadow could have hidden something watching. The spring, when I reached it, was empty, but the water looked different in the flashlight beam, darker, more viscous, like oil instead of water. When I knelt beside it, I caught a smell that hadn't been there during the day. Something organic and sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. A sound from the direction of the ruins made me turn. Faint but rhythmic, like the clanging I'd heard the first night. But not metal on stone this time. Something softer, wet. I found Marcus at the well, just as I'd found him that morning. But this time, he wasn't sitting on the wall. He was standing inside the circle of stones, waist deep in the opening I'd thought was filled with nothing but air and darkness. "Marcus, what are you doing?" He turned toward me, but in the flashlight beam his face looked wrong. The features were right, same brown eyes, same stubbled jaw, but the expression was alien, like someone wearing a mask of my boyfriend's face. "I'm going down," he said simply. "Down where?" "Marcus, get out of there. There's a chamber below. I can feel the water moving. Something's down there." "There's nothing down there but an old well. You're going to hurt yourself." "No," he said, and his voice echoed strangely, like it was coming from farther away than it should. "I'm going to find what's been calling me." He sank deeper into the opening. The stones around the rim were wet now, I noticed, dark with moisture that caught my flashlight beam. And that sweet, floral smell was stronger here, mixed with something else. Something that reminded me of the emergency room where Marcus's father had died. "Marcus, please, you're scaring me. Come out of there and we'll go home." "Home?" He laughed, and the sound echoed up from the depths like multiple voices laughing at once. "This is home, Sarah. This is where I belong." He sank lower. The water, or whatever liquid, filled the well, reaching his chest now. In another moment, it would cover his shoulders. I lunged forward and grabbed his arms, trying to pull him up. His skin was cold and slippery, like he'd been underwater for hours. But when I pulled, he didn't budge. It was like trying to lift a tree that had grown roots. "Let me go," he said, and his voice was almost gentle. "Let me find out what's down there." "There's nothing down there but death, Marcus. Please. Death isn't the opposite of life, Sarah. It's just different life." His face was inches from mine now, close enough that I could see my flashlight reflected in his pupils. But the reflections were wrong. Too bright, too deep, like his eyes were pools instead of organs. "You're not Marcus," I whispered. "I'm more Marcus than I've ever been." He reached up with one hand and touched my cheek. His fingers left wet tracks on my skin. "Come with me. See what's down there." The invitation was almost irresistible. Part of me wanted to lower myself into that dark opening, to find out what had been calling to him, to stop fighting and just surrender to whatever force had taken hold of this place. But then Marcus smiled, and I saw that his teeth were black with something that looked like mud. I jerked backward, releasing his arms. He didn't try to grab me, just watched with those two bright eyes as I stumbled away from the well. "You'll understand eventually," he said. "Everyone who comes here does." And he sank beneath the surface of whatever filled that opening, disappearing into the darkness with barely a ripple. I ran. Through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and hair, my flashlight beam wild and useless. Behind me, I could hear something emerging from the well. Not the splash of water, but a wet, sliding sound like something large moving through mud. I reached our campsite gasping, threw myself into the RV, and locked every door and window. Then I sat in the dark, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real, that Marcus had somehow climbed out of the well after I left, that he was sitting by our dying campfire wondering where I'd gone. But when I peered through the blinds, the campsite was empty. I tried my phone again. Still no signal. The RV had a radio, but when I turned it on, all I got was static punctuated by what sounded like voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, circling the RV. They stopped at the door and I held my breath, waiting for a knock that never came. Sarah, Marcus's voice muffled by the walls. I'm back. I didn't answer. I found something down there. Something wonderful. I want to show you. The footsteps resumed, moving to the window above the bed. I saw a shadow pass across the blinds. Too tall to be Marcus. Too angular. Sarah, I know you're awake. I can hear your heart beating. That couldn't be true. He couldn't hear my heartbeat through the RV's walls. But somehow, the statement didn't feel like a lie. What did you find down there? I whispered, barely audible even to myself. The source. The place where everything begins and ends. It's beautiful, Sarah. It's home. Where's Marcus? What did you do with him? Laughter from outside, but not Marcus's laugh. This was something older, hungrier. I am Marcus. I'm what he was always meant to become. No, you're not. You're something else wearing his face. Bodies are just shells, Sarah. Consciousness is fluid. I've shown him what he really is. The shadow moved away from the window, and I heard those impossible footsteps continuing around the RV. When they reached the door again, they stopped. I'm going back down now, the thing that wasn't Marcus said. But I'll wait for you. We'll all wait for you. Who's we? But there was no answer, just the sound of footsteps moving away, fading into the forest. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the door with a kitchen knife in my hand, watching the shadows move beyond the windows. Every sound made me jump. The settle of the RV's frame, the whisper of wind through trees, the distant call of something that might have been an owl. At dawn, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. Our campsite looked normal in the morning light, as if nothing had happened. The fire ring held cold ashes, and our camping chairs sat exactly where we'd left them. But Marcus's shoes were gone from beside the RV door, and in the soft earth around our site, I found footprints that started human-sized and gradually became something else. Longer, with what looked like claws instead of toes. I packed our gear with shaking hands, throwing everything into the RV without organization or care. I had to get out of these woods, had to find help, had to tell someone what had happened. Even if they didn't believe me, even if they thought I was having some kind of breakdown. The other RVs in the campground were still there, still showing no signs of life. I walked to the nearest one and knocked on the door. Hello, I need help. Silence. I tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside, the RV was furnished and stocked with supplies, but covered in a thin layer of dust that suggested no one had been there in months. The registration papers on the counter were dated from the previous summer. The second RV was the same. Empty, dusty, abandoned. I drove to the office, hoping to find the ranger. The building was unlocked, but when I called out, no one answered. The logbook on the counter was open to the same page I'd seen before, but now I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Every entry on the page was written in the same handwriting. Different names, different dates spanning decades, but the same careful script throughout. And at the bottom of the page, in fresh ink, was an entry I hadn't seen before. Marcus Chen and Sarah Chen. Site 12. They found the source. I ran back to the RV and drove toward the main road as fast as I dared on the narrow dirt track. Branches scraped against the sides, and twice I nearly ran off the path entirely. But I didn't slow down until I reached pavement. The first town I came to was 20 miles away. A cluster of gas stations and fast food restaurants around a highway interchange. I pulled into a truck stop and called 911 from a payphone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. 911, what's your emergency? My boyfriend is missing. We were camping in the Ozark National Forest and he disappeared last night. Can you give me your location, ma'am? I described the campground, but when the dispatcher tried to look it up in her system, she couldn't find any record of it. Are you sure about the name? Whispering Pines? Yes, that's what the sign said. Ma'am, I'm not showing any campground by that name in the Ozark National Forest. Are you sure you were in Arkansas? Of course I'm sure. We drove there yesterday. There was a ranger, an office, other RVs. Okay, ma'am. I'm going to transfer you to the Forest Service. They'll be able to help you better than we can. The Forest Service ranger I spoke with was polite but confused. He'd worked the Ozark National Forest for 15 years, he said, and there was no campground called Whispering Pines in his district. He gave me directions to the nearest legitimate camping area and suggested I might have gotten turned around on the forest roads. It happens more than you'd think, he said. Some of those old logging roads can be confusing, especially if you're not familiar with the area. I tried to explain about the office, the strange ranger, the well in the ruins. But even as I spoke, the details seemed to slip away from me like water through my fingers. Had there really been an office? Or just an abandoned building I'd mistaken for one? Had I actually spoken to a ranger, or just imagined the conversation? Ma'am, are you feeling all right? You sound like you might be in shock. Maybe I was. Maybe Marcus had simply left me, walked away from our relationship and our problems, found another way out of the woods. Maybe everything else was just my mind trying to create a more dramatic explanation than simple abandonment. But that didn't explain the footprints, or the voice I'd heard outside the RV, or the logbook with entries spanning decades in identical handwriting. I drove home to Atlanta in a daze, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. Every mile put distance between me and those woods, but it didn't make me feel safer. If anything, the farther I got from the forest, the more I began to doubt my own memories. Had Marcus really sunk into that well? Or had I imagined it, dreaming while he packed his things and left? Had there been a well at all? Or just the ruins of an old foundation I'd mistaken for something more sinister? At home, I called Marcus's work. They said he'd requested emergency leave, starting the day we'd left for camping. When I called his mother, she said she hadn't heard from him since the funeral. Is everything all right, dear? You sound upset. I started to tell her about the camping trip, but the words came out wrong. Confused, like trying to describe a dream that had already begun to fade. We had a fight, I said finally. He left. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. He's been having a difficult time since David passed. Maybe he just needs some space to work through his grief. Space. That was a normal explanation. One that made sense in the daylight world of phone calls and work schedules and reasonable human behavior. But that night, alone in our apartment, I heard something that made me doubt my newfound rationality. Water, dripping steadily somewhere in the walls. I checked every faucet, every pipe I could reach. Called the building maintenance. They found nothing wrong with the plumbing, no sign of leaks anywhere in the building. But I could still hear it. Drop, drop, drop. Like water falling into a very deep well. The sounds followed me for weeks. Not just the dripping, but other things. Footsteps in empty hallways, voices calling my name from rooms I'd just left. The smell of wet earth and flowers that appeared without warning. I saw doctors, therapists, sleep specialists. They all had theories. Stress, grief, guilt over Marcus's disappearance. One prescribed antidepressants, another suggested I might be having auditory hallucinations brought on by trauma. The medications helped with the obvious symptoms. The voices faded, the mysterious sounds became less frequent. But they also made everything else fade too. Colors looked washed out, food lost its taste, and I moved through days that felt like walking underwater. 3 months after the camping trip, I got a call from the police. They'd found Marcus's car in a long-term parking garage at the Atlanta airport. It had been there since the day we'd left for Arkansas, which was impossible. We'd driven to the campground in that car. I had clear memories of Marcus behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel as we navigated the forest roads. Are you sure it's the same car? I asked the detective. Same license plate, same registration. Your boyfriend's fingerprints are all over the interior. But that's impossible. We drove it to Arkansas. Ma'am, According to the parking records, this car was left here 3 days before you say you went camping. Are you sure about your timeline? I wasn't sure about anything anymore. The police found no evidence of foul play. Marcus's credit cards hadn't been used since before the camping trip, but he'd withdrawn a significant amount of cash from his bank account the week before we left. Enough to disappear if he'd wanted to. Sometimes people just need to start over, the detective told me. It's more common than you'd think. 6 months later, I moved out of our apartment. Too many memories, too many sounds that might have been real or might have been echoes of something I'd imagined. I rented a small place across town, threw away everything that reminded me of Marcus, and tried to build a life that made sense. But some nights, when the world was quiet and my defenses were down, I still heard it, that steady dripping, like water falling into an endless depth. And sometimes, in the space between sleep and waking, I heard his voice calling my name, not Marcus's voice. The thing that had worn his face in those woods, the thing that had sunk into that impossible well and emerged changed. "Sarah," it would whisper. "I'm still waiting." I began researching the Ozark Mountains, looking for any record of a place called Whispering Pines. I found nothing in official records, but deep in internet forums and local history sites, I discovered fragments that made my skin crawl. Stories of campers who'd gone missing in remote areas of the forest. Hikers who'd returned changed, speaking of underground chambers and voices in the earth. Park rangers who'd reported finding strange stone structures that didn't appear on any maps. Most disturbing were the accounts from locals who spoke of sink people, individuals who'd been drawn to certain spots in the forest and simply vanished. But others claimed to have seen them later, in the deep woods, their eyes reflecting light like animals, and their voices echoing strangely in the darkness. The stories went back generations, woven into the folklore of isolated mountain communities. Always the same pattern. People drawn to ancient sites, disappearing into the earth, returning as something else. One forum post made me close my laptop and walk away for hours. My grandfather told me about the wells. Said there were dozens of them scattered through the deep woods, most so old nobody remembered who dug them. But they weren't dug for water. They were dug to let things up from below, and once you heard them calling, you belonged to them. I tried to dismiss it as superstition, the kind of stories that grew around unexplained disappearances. But late at night, when the dripping started again, I found myself believing. The final piece came a year after Marcus vanished. I was cleaning out a box of his belongings I'd forgotten in storage when I found his journal. Most of the entries were mundane: work complaints, grocery lists, notes about books he wanted to read. But the last entry, dated the day before we'd left for camping, was different. Had that dream again. The one about the well. It's so clear now. I can see the path through the forest, can hear the water moving far below. Sarah thinks this trip is about us, about fixing what's broken between us. But I know better. I've been called. Tomorrow, I go home. I burned the journal that night, watching the pages curl and blacken in my fireplace. But the words stayed with me, echoing in my mind like voices from underground. Marcus hadn't been taken by something in those woods. He'd gone willingly, drawn by forces I couldn't understand. The man I'd loved, the man I'd planned a future with, had been hearing calls from deep places long before we'd ever set foot in that forest. And now, 3 years later, I still wake some nights to the sound of dripping water and a voice that speaks my name with Marcus's mouth. The medications keep it manageable. Therapy helps me function, and most days I can almost convince myself it's all just guilt and trauma manifesting as auditory hallucinations. But sometimes, driving through the city at night, I catch glimpses of figures at the edges of my vision. People who stand too still, who reflect streetlights from their eyes like animals, who seem to be waiting for something. And sometimes I find myself planning routes that would take me back toward Arkansas, toward those deep woods where something waits in stone-lined depths. The urge is getting stronger, harder to resist. I've started hearing new voices lately, not just Marcus, but others, men and women speaking from the spaces between walls. from the gaps under doors, from the darkness behind closed eyelids, all of them saying the same thing. Come home, Sarah. Come down to where the water flows. Come find what's been waiting for you. I've changed apartments 4 times in 3 years, changed jobs twice, but distance doesn't matter. The voices follow, patient and persistent, growing clearer each night. Last week, I caught myself researching camping equipment online, looking at RV rentals and Forest Service maps, planning a trip I swore I'd never take. Because despite everything, the fear, the loss, the years of therapy and medication, part of me wants to know what Marcus found down there. What called to him with such irresistible force that he'd abandon everything he'd built above ground. Part of me wants to return to those woods and find that well, wants to lower myself into its depths and discover what waits in the chambers below. To stop fighting and just surrender to whatever force has been pulling at me since that night I lost the man I loved to something ancient and hungry. The logical part of my mind knows this is madness, knows that Marcus is gone, whether to mental illness or genuine supernatural forces, and that following him would mean losing myself entirely. But logic grows weaker every day, worn down by the constant dripping and the voices that speak from darkness. And some mornings I wake with dirt under my fingernails and the taste of deep earth in my mouth, though I have no memory of leaving my apartment. I'm writing this down as a warning, maybe to myself, maybe to anyone who might find it later. If something happens to me, if I disappear like Marcus did, remember that it wasn't sudden. It was a slow surrender, a gradual yielding to forces that don't fit into the rational world we pretend is all there is. The wells are real. The voices are real. And once they start calling your name, once they show you the path through the deep woods, it's only a matter of time before you answer. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to start a new job, begin a new chapter of the life I've tried to rebuild. But tonight, I can hear the water moving far below the city, flowing through limestone chambers that honeycomb the earth like arteries in a vast, sleeping body. And Marcus is down there, waiting. Not the man I loved, but something wearing his shape, speaking with his voice, calling me home to depths where human concerns dissolve like salt in an endless dark ocean. I can feel myself getting ready to answer. The RV I rented is parked outside, loaded with supplies I don't remember buying. My phone shows a GPS route to a campground that doesn't exist on any official map. And in my jacket pocket, written in handwriting that looks like mine but feels foreign, are directions to a path that leads away from marked trails, deeper into woods where old stones circle wells that were never meant for water. I know I should tear up those directions, return the RV, check myself into a hospital where doctors can adjust my medications, and therapists can help me understand that voices from underground are just neurons misfiring in a brain damaged by loss. But I can hear him calling my name now, his voice echoing up from impossible depths, and the sound is sweeter than anything I've ever known. It promises answers to questions I never knew I had, reunion with parts of myself I never knew were missing. The keys are in my hand. The forest is waiting. And in the deepest wells, where ancient things slumber beneath stone and earth and time, something that was once Marcus is preparing a place for me in the dark, flowing spaces below the world. I think it's time to go home.